Good evening and welcome to the Select Board meeting of Wednesday, September 22nd, 2021. This meeting is being held remotely pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021 and is being taped and broadcast by Milton Access Television. Could we go around the Zoom room and introduce ourselves? My name is Katie Conlon. I'm currently the chair of the board.
Arthur Doyle, vice chair.
Mike Zulis, secretary.
Melinda Collins, member.
Richard Wells, member.
Mike Dennehy, I'm your town administrator.
And we're also joined by Suzanne Stewart, our executive administrative assistant, whom we'll mention a little bit later in the meeting. This is her last meeting with us. And we're very grateful for all of Susie's help over the last several months and wish her well, but we'll cover that at the end of or later on in the meeting. Before the next item on our agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. If everyone would please stand and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance, and we will put up on our screen the flag. Oh, there we are. Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
One nation,
under God,
Indivisible,
with liberty
and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. Before we get started tonight and get to public comment, I wanted to just note that last night, several of us were able to attend the retirement celebration for Laurie Stillman, who is the executive director of the Milton Substance Abuse Prevention Coalition. It was a lovely evening for Laurie, who served the town in many capacities through the school committee, the long-range planning committee for the schools many years ago, and as a town meeting member. It was a very nice tribute to her at the Milton High School courtyard last evening, well attended. And we did read, Melinda Collins and I read the proclamation that the board had prepared and signed and presented that to Laurie. So it was a very nice evening. And I just wanted to mention that at the beginning of this meeting because she's someone who has served the town, in this case as a town employee, but in a volunteer capacity over many years. Do we have anyone this evening for public comment? I'm going to look to the attendee list. If so, please use the chat function to raise your hand. I see one hand raised, Bettina Urquioli, and I'm probably mispronouncing your name, Bettina, so my apologies.
Okay. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, could you just state your name and address for the record, please?
I'm at 77 Granite Place. My name is Bettina Uccioli.
Good evening.
Hi. Yeah, I'm here to provide comments for the planning board meeting about the development in East Milton. Am I in the correct meeting?
No, this is the select board's meeting. The planning board is meeting at the same time, but they're on a different Zoom platform.
I see.
If you,
that would make
I'm
sense.
sorry about that. If you go to the town website and just go to public meetings, you'll see a Zoom link for the planning board.
Okay.
You'll be able to go to their meeting and offer your comments there. If you want to comment on it here, you can certainly feel free to, but if you want to reach the planning board, that would be the way to get to them.
All right. I appreciate it. Thanks for understanding. Sorry to bother you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay. Are there any other hands for public comment this evening? I don't see any other hands raised. And no one is on the phone, so we don't need to star 9. Okay, then we will go on, and I see that we've already moved up John O'Rourke. I was going to ask the board to take item 17B out of order. I think Mr. Rourke may have a brief presentation, so why don't we cover the good energy item, and then before we get to COVID-19, if everyone is willing, 17B is the update on the Massport Community Advisory Committee meeting tomorrow evening, and we can take that after community electricity aggregation. So good evening, John. Nice to see you. Welcome.
Nice to see you too, Madam Chair and members of the board, and Michael, of course. Thank you for letting me appear before you tonight to give you an update on the community electricity aggregation program launch. If I could share my screen.
Yes, please.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Essentially, I just want to go over some of the launch information. As you know, the program, we've been working with Milton now for a number of years. We finally came to the point where we were able to go out for bid in June. And the town, through much discussion, had three separate options: Milton Green, Milton Premium Green 100, and Milton Basic. Milton Green is the option that if anyone didn't opt out, they were automatically put into. And the rate for Milton Green is 10,848. You can see that the premium is 14,133, and the basic, which is the same amount of green energy as Eversource in their basic service, is 10,483. For comparison's sake, I understand that Milton is an Eversource community, but for comparison's sake, I put in the national grid rate that just was announced at 14,821. This is a very high rate. And essentially the Eversource rate, which will come out and be announced in November, usually November 15th, for the January 2022 start, is essentially usually pretty close to the national grid rate. That's essentially why I gave you this rate as a way of comparison. The launch information. We have households, according to the US Census in Milton, of about 8,875, and customers on Eversource basic service of 8,476. The difference between those two numbers are people who have already gone out and have a third-party supplier. So we're not allowed to market to those people. Only those residents on the Eversource basic service were sent a customer notification letter that explained the program and essentially gave them their options to either stay in the program or to get out of the supplier, Nextera, received 906 opt-outs, and there were 333 rejections. Now, normally what that means is that the data between Eversource and Nextera somehow was a problem with 333 records. And usually what happens is the supplier and Eversource get together and resolve those issues. The enrollments, 7,240, which indicates out of the eligible customers, an 85% rate of adoption for the program, which is very good and very consistent with other communities that we have in Eastern Massachusetts. Again, your national grid rate came out. We were very surprised at how high this rate was. But essentially over the last 2 months or so, the natural gas futures rate has gone up significantly. And again, what happens with both utilities, they have to go out to bid at a very, very specific time of the year, and it doesn't make any difference whether the market is good or not. One of our advantages was that we went out in June for this start, and we were able to get a lower rate because at that time the natural gas rates were much lower. Again, we're expecting that rate for Eversource to be put out on November 15th for the January 2022 start. It's expected to be obviously much higher than the Eversource rate now. We didn't want to make a prediction on that, but normally the rate for National Grid and the rate for Eversource are usually within a pretty tight. And again, our default rate for the aggregation is a very good 10.8. We were expecting that the Milton enrollment percentage would be in that 80 to 85% range. And meeting the goal with just a little over 85% indicates that our public outreach and education that we conducted for the launch of the program was effective. We had, I know I had meetings myself at 2 communities, plus I was at the farmers market for 4 weeks, and we got a lot done in terms of answering residents' questions at those events. So we're very happy with the way the outreach went, and we're very happy with the enrollment percentage. Again, we're going to get that Eversource rate on or about November 15th. We expect it to be high, and you'll probably see some of those people who opted out once they find out what the rate is for Eversource, and they talk to neighbors and friends who are paying less. You'll probably see some of those people coming into the program. So you could very well, end up here with an enrollment rate up toward 90%. So that's very good. Okay. Any questions on the launch?
Does anyone have a question for Mr. O'Rourke or a comment? Mr. Zulus.
Mr. Rourke, just to make sure I understand it, if the Eversource rate is consistent with the National Grid rate, then because of the implementation of this program, Milton residents are going to get energy at a much lower rate than they otherwise would have. Is that fair to say?
That's correct. Yes. The aggregation rate is 10.8, and that is fixed for the entirety of the program, which goes until November 2024. So that rate will stay the same. As you know, the Eversource rate adjusts every 6 months. And as I say, this is expected to be a pretty high rate for that January to June period forever.
And when I said a significant cost savings for Milton residents, that would be Milton residents who didn't opt out, right?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rourke. Thank you, Mr. O'Rourke.
Ms. Collins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I thought this was great news, and people who opted for the 100% could feel really good given that National Grid rate if Eversource comes in near it. But I did want to say a big thank you to Mr. O'Rourke and Daria as well. But the fact that you came and to the farmers market, I think made a big difference, and Sustainable Milton as well. I think that their dedication and the article that was written, you just made a great team with them, and I really appreciate that Good Energy really valued our community civic organization.
Thank you, Member Collins. We enjoyed the outreach thoroughly, and just to note, you did have 30 residents who opted up into the 100%. All right, and with a little more marketing for that, and once the program gets established and people understand it better, you're going to see more people go into that 100% option.
Anyone else? Questions or comments for Mr. O'Rourke? Seeing none, then John, thank you so much. I'll reiterate what I see Mike Dennehy has his hand up, but I'll just reiterate what Ms. Collins said. in terms of this being a good benefit for the residents who have opted in. And it's nice to see so many who did decide to take advantage of this program. It was optional, and a good number chose to take part. So thank you so much, John. And Mr. Dennehy, did you have a comment or a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just going to ask Mr. O'Rourke if we could share this slide deck.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, if there's no other questions, I'll say good night and thank you again for allowing us to appear before you tonight. And your program launch, we think, is very successful.
Thank you very much, John. Have a good evening. Thanks for all of your efforts. Okay, then that was item number 4. So as I mentioned previously, if there's no objection from the members, I'd like to move up item 17B, which was under the chair's report. It was an update on the Massport Community Advisory Committee meeting that will be held tomorrow evening. Is everyone okay with moving that item up? And the reason being that this has been a long and very important issue in the town, and I think it would be better to cover it earlier in the evening rather than later when we may not have as many viewers who are watching. So I'll start this, and we do have our CAC representative who is in the attendee group. And Susie, if you would move Mr. Doherty up to be a panelist.
I apologize, Madam Chair, but I believe he fell off of the list. I think maybe he was disconnected and he might be rejoining.
Okay, so we may rejoin. In that case, then perhaps, let me see it. The next item is the COVID update. Why don't we take the COVID update and we'll see if Mr. Doherty comes back on the line. Mr. Dennehy, I think you were going to cover the COVID update for us.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the board. I had a brief discussion with our health director, Caroline Kinsella, today, and she sent me a very concise update. So the past few days, the COVID-19 case counts for the town of Milton. There were 14 cases since Saturday. Saturday, there were 3 cases, 5 on Sunday, 2 on Monday, and 4 yesterday. Half of these cases have been vaccinated for COVID-19, and our health director is seeing breakthrough cases, which, according to their phone interviews with residents, are hearing that these breakthrough cases are experiencing primarily mild symptoms, headaches, loss of smell, taste, and cold or allergy symptoms. It's the unvaccinated cases that seem to be having more severe symptoms. She's reporting that yesterday, on the 21st, BID Milton Hospital, there are currently 9 inpatients, 1 in the emergency room, 1 in the ICU, and 5 on inpatient floors. Of the 7 inpatients, 6 are unvaccinated. Sorry. None of these patients are Milton residents. They are from Randolph, Hyde Park, Rosendale, and Quincy. And then she pulled some stats from mass.gov. Over the past 2 weeks, Milton has 64 cases, up 4 cases over the prior 2-week period. The 14-day positivity percentage is slightly higher at 2.2%. And lastly, in Milton, over 67% of the population over 12 years of age are fully vaccinated. And I'll close with the fact that we are still trying to formalize the next COVID testing date, understanding that school is back in session and a lot of people are back in the office. So we're trying to coordinate a date with Milton Police, Transformative Healthcare, and DPW for an upcoming Sunday. Understanding that we will be focusing on and before the holiday season as we get here, as that was our by far our most well-attended meetings, testing dates last year. So thank you for that, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you for that report. Does anyone have a question or a comment for Mr. Dennehy regarding COVID-19 and the update? Well, please thank Caroline Kinsella for providing that information for us this evening.
Will do.
I think Mr. Doherty may be, oh, he is here now. I thought I saw him in the attendee group. Has been moved up as a panelist. Okay, so we're going to go to item 17B then, and for the others who are waiting in the attendee group, we will be getting to you soon. I don't think this item will take very long. Tomorrow evening at 5:30 p.m. on the Zoom platform is an important meeting, particularly for Milton residents and for residents of other communities. The Massport Community Advisory Committee will be hearing for the final time from MIT, which has been conducting for the past 5 years, a study of the different RNF paths, concentrated airplane lanes, in the, for lack of a better word, in the sky, and the problems of concentrated noise and pollution that we've been talking about for a long time at many different meetings in town, including at the board's meetings. So we're wrapping up, we're coming to the end of this 5-year study, and it's important for any resident who would like to attend and would like to watch it on the Zoom. We'll provide the information. Maybe we could put that up on the town webpage with the Zoom link for the CAC meeting for any resident who would be interested in attending. Mr. Zulus may wish to weigh in, and perhaps Tom Doherty, our CAC representative, would also like to weigh in. MIT has identified some viable alternatives. As we all know, the runway for our arrival path presents the most serious burden on Milton. There are other paths that that are issues as well, but the 4-hour path does create the most traffic and the most noise over the town, and that is the one that's being studied. The MIT group is not studying 4 left, or they are studying 27 for the departures. So MIT has identified some alternatives that could be used to supplement, not in replacement of what's over Milton, but to supplement, so that we would achieve through the RNF system a dispersal of the flights over Milton. And the town has been advocating that those paths should be put into effect and help spread out some of the burden that did exist in dispersing the flights as they were prior to the 4-hour RNAV being imposed upon Milton several years ago, without any notice, real notice, significant notice or consent by the town. So the MIT study is intended to address this problem, and tomorrow will be an opportunity for anyone who is on the Zoom to hear the presentation. There have been prior presentations that some of us have been on, and in talking with Mr. Zulus, there's an opportunity for elected officials to speak tomorrow. I'm going to try to at least listen in on the meeting. Mr. Zulus, I know, is going to has offered that he would be willing to speak as an elected official and could represent our board at that meeting and offer comments on behalf of the town. So, Mike, do you want to add to that? And then why don't we open it up to Tom?
Yeah, I mean, Katie, I think you captured it well. MIT has, in a sense, done its job with respect to runway 4R and presented 3 flyable alternatives, one of which is a close replacement to what was in place prior to the RNAV. And, you know, as you mentioned, it has been our effort to propose one or more of these alternatives as a supplement, not as a substitution. You know, this community understands that given our geographic location, we're going to have some burden from airplanes, but what we're seeking is just some relief from the excessive burden that we have borne since the RNAV went in place. One thing that we've asked MIT, one additional thing, and we hope we get it, is we've asked them to show that comparison from pre-RNAV to what would happen with these flyable alternatives, just so you can compare it not from now to what the alternatives would be in terms of benefit and disbenefit, but from what it was pre-RNAV to what it could be in terms of benefit and disbenefit. We haven't received that comparison from them yet. We think that's really the relevant comparison. We hope to get that. We hope they'll take a look at that, and we also we've hoped for a regional solution to this, and you know, as yet the other communities have not been excited about these 3 flyable alternatives, but we hope that we can have a regional solution where again there can be some sharing, so that this community doesn't bear 100% of the burden that came into effect with the 4R RNF. So that's what I think we hope for. Anyway.
Yeah, I think the issue is fairness, and that's the goal of dispersion really is regional fairness. Mr. Doherty, if you'd like to weigh in with any comments, please certainly feel free. We know you've been advocating at the CAC for these viable alternatives for us. And again, I just want to reiterate for our board members that the Zoom meeting is 5:30 to 7:30. It's a 2-hour meeting. A good portion of the meeting will be the presentation by MIT. And there's probably going to be a lot of interested parties looking to speak and ask comments during the portion allotted to the public, if elected officials and the public. I understand there may also be an opportunity to submit written comments after that, and perhaps our board would like to weigh in writing prior to that deadline to the FAA. But I think if Mr. Zulus is able to speak on our behalf tomorrow, that will be a good thing. And I'm going to try to listen to most of the presentation if possible. I have a lot of work commitments tomorrow, so I'm glad Mike is willing to take this on.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, Tom. Yes, thank you.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate the opportunity. And I believe that Madam Chair and Mr. Zulus, you've said it well. Tomorrow, MIT's information session at 5:30 p.m. on the Mass Board Zoom. It'll be helpful for Milton residents to again see each of the 3 flyable alternatives that MIT has identified after 5 years of study. Any of those paths could, if used in rotation with the existing path as a supplement to the existing 4 right arrival path, which concentrated over Milton, it could reduce and ameliorate some of that effect, and could augment the present RNAV path, not substitute for it, by a rotation method and relieve, some of our overflight burdens. I'll say, however, secondly, importantly, Quincy, for example, has previously objected to any additional arrival flights to be restored over it, even though, as a former Quincy resident, the 4-hour arrival flights went over West Quincy and North Quincy areas, but Quincy has objected to any arrival path dispersion. And that's a fact that needs to be taken into account. I've repeatedly, not simply recently, but repeatedly asked MIT in connection with its presentations to do one more thing. That is to say, continually they will compare the existing RNAV path with a potential alternative path. And so, for example, of the 3 RNAV paths that are potential alternatives that MIT has identified as feasible and flyable, one goes somewhat over at a high altitude over Hingham and then over the water. Another goes at a still high but lesser high alternative over Howe's Neck and over water. But the third goes essentially over North Quincy, West and North Quincy, and then over Marina Bay. That's not new. There's nothing new about that compared to what existed before, and I can tell you personally. Having said that, and the reason it's a curved path, RNP path, we had asked MIT to look at an angle that was slightly different from that, a little less. And they said, well, because of the radio tower over, as you know, that area of the West Quincy area, which we're all familiar with, as an RNAV path, that could be problematical. So they've adjusted for that in their feasibility. Okay, so what I've been asking though is not simply to compare what the population exposure would be of the present RNAV path with, let's say, for example, the Hingham or the Howe's Neck or the West and North Quincy path in terms of the exposure. Now, they have shown that
Tom, we can't hear you now. We may have lost the connection. or at least the audio portion of the connection.
Can you hear
Okay.
me now?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay, thank you, sorry. So I'll just pick up where I was. With regard to the MIT comparison of the alternative paths with the existing path, RNF path, you know, they've compared and said, well, the Hingham path and over the water, there'd be 20,000 fewer people affected, population impact, which is helpful. They've given the altitudes, which are higher in that approach. But of course, that's not analogous to the degree that the other paths are. So when you look at the path over Howe's Neck and then over water, 8,000 fewer people would be affected. But again, it's less analogous than over, say, Western North Windsor. On Western North Windsor, their comparison shows about 18,000 more people than under the present RNAV affected, which is understandable because the RNAV, by shifting west, concentrated all the flights over Milton. Consequently, what I'm asking them to do is, and we provided in a meeting with Congressman Lynch, a slide that has a blue-black background and a flight path foreground that looks like a painting with multiple stripes. It's the flight paths pre-RNAV, October 2009, before, not after. And what we've asked MIT to do then, and now again, is to compare that population impact with the present concentrated population impact, because I believe that that will demonstrate that there's been not just a concentration and shifting, but if you look at it, there's a significantly larger population that used to have some share of the burden, some element of the equity here. So that's what I would like to see tomorrow presented. I reiterated it recently. We'll see. And then we'll have to then, after that, take it all into account and then go forward. And we'll see what, if any, further steps there are. It won't be MIT steps after that. It will be MCAC and other steps after that. So that's my report.
Thank you, Tom. Does any member of the board have a question or a comment? Seeing and hearing none, then I think we're all set for, so it's tomorrow evening, 5:30 to 7:30. The Zoom link we'll put up on the town website. It's also on the MCAC website. And I encourage anyone who's available during those hours to go to it. And thank you to Mr. Zulus for speaking and bringing out the town's position tomorrow evening. I think the deadline may be early October to submit written materials, so we'll get the firm date tomorrow. And our next meeting, I think, is the 13th of October. So we may need to schedule a special meeting if we do want to submit written comments, but let's see how things go tomorrow. Well, thank you very much, Tom. We appreciate your time tonight
Thank you.
and all of your efforts.
Yeah, thank you. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Okay, we're back to item 6, which is a department report from the Public Works Department. And Chase Berkeley, our DPW director, is with us this evening. We'll move him up to panelist. Good evening, Mr. Berkeley.
Good evening, Madam Chair. Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me tonight. And thank you for your time. So you should have a outline I provided just to kind of stick to some talking points. But if all right with you, I'd very happy to answer questions throughout it. You don't feel like you need to wait to the end on my behalf if you want to stay on topic with anything. Again, Chase Berkeley, Director of Public Works. A department of 41 individuals in town, 28 field staff, and the rest administrative, and 2 co-ops included in that. So on the topic of staffing, so we're currently at full staff. We have no vacancies in the department. We have 1 person out injured, but it is a full spot. And right now we're coming up on just about a year of a pretty significant transition in our engineering department, where 3 out of the 4 permanent members resigned and left the town to go elsewhere, along with a lot of institutional knowledge and a lot of years of experience with the town. And we're in a pretty comfortable place now. So everyone that we've hired is very, very talented. We're very happy to have them. And they've been with us almost 4 seasons, which you do need to live through in public works to get a real feel for the industry. But everyone's settled in very nicely and working well. So happy to report that. Along the lines of the field staff, we did just conclude a COVID-19 outbreak within the department where we had 6 members test positive, and just got our last one back this week from the quarantine period. In addition to the 6 positive, we had 4 more that had to quarantine because of exposure. So we were down 10 members for about 2 weeks, but thankfully we're past that now, and hopefully that's the last hurdle for a while on that front. And so what I did is I put together some topics moving beyond staffing that we don't typically talk about when we come to the board, because there's a lot of times when Public Works comes and presents things, but we don't sometimes get into our average day business. So I wanted to highlight some of the things that are always kind of going on behind the scenes. But again, if you have questions about other things in the Public Works world, please feel free. So I'll touch on solid waste first. So solid waste saw a significant increase in tonnage with the pandemic, and that seems to still be pretty much on pace from where we were in the 2017, 2018 years, where the tonnage is up compared to them. So we attribute that basically to people being home more and not going into work and school as often as they used to. On the revenue side, we have seen significant revenue increases through sticker purchases in the annual barrel trash bill that comes along with it. So we're trying to keep pace. Essentially, the pay-as-you-throw program funds about half of the overall cost of solid waste management. So right around 50% typically of the money that it takes to run the solid waste program is brought in through the pay-as-you-throw, and the rest of that is split between the general fund and the stormwater enterprise fund to fund yard waste. So that's where we are with that. A very, very exciting month. Last month, we got notified by our recycling processor that we were actually getting a rebate check, which is the first time we've heard that since August of 2017 is the last time that happened. And that is attributed to a global market condition for recycled goods. So that's finally rebounded. It wasn't a big check. I think it was under the cost of the stamp to send it, but it's definitely trending in the right direction, which is great to see, because at one point we were paying $120 a ton to process recycles, which is, essentially a net loss, and more expensive to process it if we had thrown it in the trash. So great to be on the other side of that curve as well.
Jay, do you think that's a trend that might continue? Because I know that's been an issue for communities all around the country. But do you think we might start moving back in the direction we used to be in?
I do. I don't know how quickly we'll get back to those high rates that we saw back then. But what's kind of happened is 2 things. So one is the local infrastructure to process recycling took about 18 months to build. So we used to send everything overseas for it to be processed, and when that became not an option, local enterprises started popping up in the U.S. to process that material, and it takes time to build that infrastructure. You can't just turn on a factory. So that's coming online, and at the same time, with all of the supply chain issues, manufacturers are very anxious to get their hands on raw materials for manufacturing. So those 2 are kind of driving that commodity price back up. So hopefully we see it, become much more profitable than single digits. All right, and just a quick reminder, coming up on October 16th, we'll host our annual solid waste collection day for residents, so they turn in chemicals and typical things that you're not supposed to throw away in the trash, free of charge for Milton residents. So that'll be Saturday, October 16th. It's the same day as the Mike's 5K, but the 2 events don't interrupt each other, so they're just far enough apart that you won't get stuck in both of them if you try to come down to the yard. And speaking of the yard, so moving on to some housekeeping, we have received and are very grateful for funds from the Capital Improvement Committee, the Warrant Committee, and the board to pave our parking lot, which is in dire need of it. It's pretty bad. Anyone who knows it, basically around the fuel area to where the operations building is, it's in dire need of some resurfacing. So it will take about 3 phases to do that from a monetary standpoint. So we have enough money right now to do about a third of it. So we're going to be putting that out to bid, working with Bill Ritchie also in Consolidated Facilities, looking at possibly including some work at the Council on Aging and in the high school as part of that bid. It's a good opportunity to lock in those services. It's very difficult for us to use the paving contractors that we use for streets to do parking lots. There's just not a crossover between those two types of work, and it's hard to get those contractors to mobilize in. So we're going to put this out as an individual package so that we have them locked in for a schedule and committed to doing the work. So that's actually going out this week for advertisement. Will be available publicly to bid on. And so moving on from that, so I just wanted to highlight some of the capital projects going on around town. So sticking with the paving, so there's been 2 significant paving and sidewalk reconstruction efforts that have been completed in town. The first effort was paving the streets in the area of Otis, Reservation, Row, Huntington, Waldeck. That there was a whole group of streets. You can view it on the Public Works website if you wanted to see a map of what we did. So those streets were all resurfaced and paved over the summer. And shortly after that, we reconstructed all of the sidewalks in the neighborhood behind Town Hall. So Fairbanks, Magnolia, that area. Those sidewalks have now been completed. And so we're doing our best to coordinate what contractors are available and get them in as soon as we can to get work completed. So we're using those dollars that have been allocated to that, and we show the production that we want to. So there'll be a few more phases of that. So the first area I mentioned, surrounding Otis Street and off of Edge Hill, the sidewalk construction will begin there probably the first week of October. And all the streets we paved, we're going to rebuild the sidewalks on next. And those have already been retrofitted with wheelchair ramp accessible ramps on all those streets too. Those are done. And then there's another contract for that area behind Town Hall that is going to rehabilitate all of the sewers and drains before we pave the streets, which will be in the spring. So that'll be starting up in October as well. So there's a mix of both digging up and repairing pipes that have failed, and then also inserting liners into the pipes that are still structurally okay, but could use reinforcement. So what we'll do is basically fix all of the water, sewer, drain, and the gas company has replaced the infrastructure on those streets as well. And then we can pave them in the spring, and we'll be in a very good position that no one will need to go back and dig up a new street for a long time. Knock on wood there. So that kind of covers the paving and the associated sewer and drain work with it. There is always kind of in the background our stormwater compliance efforts for our new permit issued by EPA. So one of the main focuses of that is what they call illicit discharge and detection elimination. So this is essentially when sewage somehow works its way into the storm drain system and then gets released to rivers and water bodies in town. We're required to seek that out by first testing and finding it and then locating the source. Sometimes it's a source that the town can fix because it's part of our infrastructure. And sometimes that source is a private residence that we need to work with the homeowner to make repairs in their own system. It's very common to see someone hook up a bathroom or say a shower or laundry unit into the wrong pipe in their wall. And then that actually ends up getting released, to a water body instead of into our sewer system. So that program is always kind of sweeping through the town. It's a pretty long effort. We're judging it will take probably 6 to 7 years to get through the town completely and kind of find everything there is to find. Thankfully, our first round of sampling, we're in pretty good shape. We don't see a lot of contamination coming from the town's drainage system. So there are some things we need to track down, but overall, we're in pretty good shape there. But you'll see the crews out popping manholes, walking them, along streams and backyards, and that's what they're doing, and that's always kind of running in the background. And it's a cost to that. So I do want to highlight it because it is a valiant effort to go after those illicit discharges. And then moving on to water main replacement. So 2 weeks ago, a new water main replacement contract started. The first streets they're doing are Cheever, Dexter, and Hudson in the west side of town. That was the contract that this board, as well as others, recommended ARPA funding for. So thank you for that. That helped fund that work, and it is ongoing now. So you'll see that progress through the fall, and those streets will be, the water mains will be replaced along with all the water services that are in the public way for each house, and upgrade all that infrastructure, which, increases reliability and also water quality. And there's plenty to do there. So it will probably stop with those streets in the fall and then resume in the spring with about 4 or 5 more streets in that same area. So that's it for kind of capital projects that relate to the enterprise fund and paving. I did want to mention a little bit about snow and ice, although it is a swear word in the public works world in September. So you'll see advertisements in the news, and if you drive down the highways, there's a plow driver shortage regionally. There's just not enough drivers to fill the amount of spots that contractors are willing to hire them for. We're pretty consistent with which contractors we enter into every year for plowing, but we do hear that they're trying to secure their own drivers and struggling as compared to other years. So that just a smaller pool of eligible, CDL equipped drivers that can drive that equipment. So nothing to be concerned about yet, but just something to be aware of that, you will see it in the mainstream. And it is, along with the supply chain, it's just a factor of today's world that there's just less resources to fill those seats than they used to be. And I left it off the list, but I did want to talk about our 2 electricians that work on the fire alarm and traffic lights in town, because they do a tremendous amount of work for 2 individuals, and it's often behind the scenes. But they have been very focused on the new fire station projects and how we're going to transfer the fire alarm system, which are those red boxes that you would pull if you didn't have a cell phone, that are out in the neighborhoods and also attached to the sides of many buildings. That triggers a whole system that is 100-plus-year-old technology, but incredibly reliable, and often cited as something that works when cell phone systems get jammed and go down. It'll ring the bells in the fire stations, and they know exactly where that emergency is. So there's a plan to obviously move that into the new building, and there's a lot of infrastructure work that needs to happen out on the poles and in the building itself to make that happen without any downtime. So there's no good time to turn that system off. So you have to keep it alive while it's moved. And so that's being planned out, and looking at what equipment would be necessary to buy either through the project or as a separate capital expense to make that happen. And I think that was it for my outline. If you'd like, I could give you a quick update on the deck
Sure.
project, the MassDOT East Milton Square project. I did check in. So I spoke with Mike Melvin, their foreman on site today, who's got the most specific knowledge of the project. And he's told me that they have started the structural repairs on the deck that has begun. And they're anticipating to start I-93 lane closures at night to do some of that work beginning in October. So that'll be coming up the next couple of weeks. You'll see advisories for, 4 lanes going down to 3 or 2, depending on which part of underneath the deck they need to access. Along with that, all of the curb work in phase 3 has been completed. They're going to be finishing pouring the concrete inside those islands and curbing, but the curb has all been set. And they anticipate that in about 2 weeks from now will be all poured, and they'll basically just be moving onto the deck itself. Aside for some periphery stuff that you can visibly see is still outstanding. There's still some unanswered questions that arose from conflicts underground that weren't anticipated or known. The most visible being the new big mast arm posts that hold up the traffic lights. Some of those still have barrels and cones around them because when they went to install them, the wall holding up the tunnel of the expressway was actually thicker than record drawings had indicated. So moving that post also means moving all the wires that connect to it and all the conduit. So there's a ripple effect, and it just takes time to work through that design process to move all those things properly. So once they get those revised designs back, that stuff will button up at the same time too, and work will focus mainly just on the deck itself. As far as the traffic signals, they have received all the camera and detection equipment at the site, and the electrical contractor is beginning to install that. So anyone that's driven there in the last few weeks, you've seen the new lights go up and they're active, but they're not working as efficient as they will once all of the detection equipment and the computer programs that coordinate between each site are turned on. So that hasn't happened yet, that coordination piece. So that's still to come. They're anticipating that will be probably around the end of November when all that equipment will be installed and calibrated to work kind of seamlessly within itself. So it's a little inefficient now, even though it's new, but it will get better, which is the good part. I think, yeah, that was all his main topics that he wanted mentioned, but happy to answer any other questions about the deck or anything
And Chase, just on that point, your first point
else
about,
at this time, if you have any.
thank you very much, Chase. And on your first point about the deck, about the underground work, just for the benefit of the public, that's because there was a leakage problem with water leaking down onto the highway. And that's another key component of this project, is the repair of that situation and resolving that situation. So, okay, well, thank you for your report. And you didn't mention your staff who just do some basic things like cleaning the trash out of the business districts, even on the weekends and the weekdays. And I just want to compliment them on that, because I've noticed how frequently they're there, especially on weekends. And trash pickup is very important for residents and for the business areas. So I see your staffers in the Central Avenue area in particular many days, and they're always hard at work, and they're always very friendly, and they do whatever they can to help out in those areas. So thank you to the DPW staff for all the good work, just on something basic that affects cleanliness of the town and quality of life. Does anyone have a comment or a question for Chase Berkeley? Mr. Dennehy, anything you would like? Oh, I see Mr. Wells' hand, but Mr. Dennehy, anything you'd like to add as well, please feel free. Mr. Wells.
Michael can go first, Madam Chair.
Okay, Mr. Dennehy. You're on mute, Mike. There we go.
Sorry, thank you, Madam Chair. I would just like to thank Chase as a former Public Works Commissioner. I don't think people really understand how much Public Works touches residents and business owners and commuters' lives on a daily basis, whether it's from trash pickup to, sanitation, any type of sanitation, or snow plowing as we get into that, and fresh water and sewer and all that stuff. So I just want to thank Chase for his leadership. In fact, Christine Stanton and Katie O'Brien have invited Chase and I over to the Council on Aging this Friday at 10:30 to basically sit down for a breakfast with some of our seniors and just go over some of the things that Chase talked about here tonight, and take some specific requests from people, because I've said it often, that street light that might be out in front of someone's house, or that pothole that they continue to drive over is very important, and it's quality of life stuff that Public Works touches on a daily basis that makes Milton, helps make Milton part of what it is. So thank you, Chase, and anyone that wants to tune in. I think it's being streamed on Zoom as well, as Chase and I field a multitude of very specific and pointed questions from our senior population. So thank you, Chase.
Hey, Mr. Wells.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Chase, and to all your staff. I'm glad you mentioned the tear on the liner. I think maybe Mr. Doyle may be the only one other than myself that remembers this. Prior to that deck being created and the liner being put in, and there's a great deal of underground catch basin work that was done in what we call the tunnel, the north and southbound sides of 93, or the hole, and they call it the hole in the square. Every time it rained, we'd be in the same position that some commuters on Route 9 were in a couple of weeks ago, where cars being flooded right up to their roofs, and that has not happened in many, many years. So that's a good thing. I know some residents think the work has stopped, but the tear that Madam Chair talked about has to be fixed before we go forward and adding on that. And then just a little bit of intel for you that I can give you is, we're heading into that season. I see the salt ships coming to the Fall River Basin in Quincy today to Catherine's Yard, unloading the tons and tons of salt the communities are going to need for this upcoming winter. Even though we haven't even raked leaves yet, the salt ships are arriving this week. So thanks again.
Mr. Doyle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to join everybody in complimenting Chase and his many good colleagues on the thorough work that they do on behalf of our citizenship. It's a remarkable accomplishment, and Mitch is right about the water, and he's right about the dreadful use of salt. Maybe, Madam Chair, we might be able to invite Chase back at a later date for an update on the work and plans of the Traffic Commission.
Okay, we'll put that on for future agenda items. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I could, so the Traffic Commission will be meeting next week, and we'll be trying to get on your agenda for the recommendations from that meeting anyway, so we can coordinate that together.
Okay, so probably one of the October meetings. That'd be good.
We did not coordinate that, Chase and I. Pure serendipity.
Best job in town, Traffic Commission Chair.
Any other comments or questions for Mr. Berkeley? Mike, Mr. Zulus?
Yeah, I mean,
I thought I saw you on mute, so I thought that.
Yeah, no, I wasn't sure I was going to take the time, but I'll take 10 seconds. And on behalf of the neighborhood behind Town Hall, just thank the DPW for all the great work they've been doing, including Marina Fernandez, Tim Anascio, and all of the team. They've been doing great work, great job there. And also, I think, Chase, you were talking about the wire department. I think you were talking about, you didn't mention their names. So you were talking about Jack Calabro and I don't know who the other name is.
Kevin Lynch.
Kevin Lynch, right. So
Actually, not Kevin Lynch, Kevin
Larkin. Yep.
Kevin Larkin.
yeah. And I want to, and Jack, not only for all the work he's doing with the wires, he's been attending municipal broadband meetings at 8 a.m. on Monday as well. So I just want to thank your department for the input on that.
Mr. Dennehy.
Madam Chair, one last thing. Chase touched upon it lightly, but the fact that the engineering department has been completely turned upside down in a year, and they're accomplishing what they're accomplishing is a tremendous feat. And again, Mike, you mentioned Ms. Fernandez and Mr. Ignacio. I mean, we've got Erica De Donato over there from our environmental coordinator, who's going to roll out a new app to the town next month that we'll talk about. And we've got Mr. Bishop, who's been there for years, that continues to pump out anything you ask him to pump out. So I appreciate, Mike, you bringing those names up, and just the public needs to understand that our engineering department was here intact for about 18 or 20 years, and then come in with new bodies like this and just continue and make it a somewhat seamless operation is a credit to Mr. Berkeley and his team. But just to welcome those folks again, it's monumental, and it's quite an accomplishment.
Well, in addition to that, we have 7 or 8 40B applications at various stages before the town. So I know that both Mr. Berkeley, Ms. Fernandez, and others are weighing in on those, and that input is really valuable. So thank you for juggling all of that along with everything else. So thanks for your report tonight, Mr. Berkeley. And seeing or hearing any other comments or questions? If not, we'll let you go and get back to your evening.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, everybody. I will stick around for the next agenda item if you're going to go to the 360 trees. Just if there's any questions, I'll be here. But I'll let Mr. John David Corey take the stage if he's up.
Okay, that's true. Yes, and also Laura Beebe.
Yes, and Laura Beebe too.
List. Okay, so we're on to item 7, which is the 360 tree initiative update. This is the tree fundraising and planting, and we have some good news to share on this front. And do we have? Okay, so we have Laura Beebe and we have John David Corey. Okay, there he is. Well, welcome to the board's meeting this evening. Thank you for waiting.
Laura, do you want to go first?
No,
John? No? Well, I don't know if Mike Dennehy wants to set this up, perhaps?
I can, but I think this is all Mr. Corey and Ms. Beebe. I mean, the work that has been done here is tremendous, and there are some thank yous to come, but the floor is yours, Mr. Corey and Ms. Beebe.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Madam Chair and the rest of the board. You guys gave us approval, the SPAC, to initiate the Milton 360 Shade Tree campaign April 14th of this year. So we've been at it for about 5 months, and we did a quiet campaign where we sent letters to certain community leaders, and that was really well received. I think we hit like around 30% hit rate, and we had donations from $50 to $5,000 in that campaign. And that was very successful and very fun. And the treasurer was sending us, copies of who was donating. And then we write the tax letters. We worked with the town council on the wordage of that letter, and they've been going out. So I think that's well. And actually, I think Laura's in charge of writing personal thank you notes to everybody that donates to the cause. And then the second phase of the project was to sort of outreach to area foundations. And we reached out to the Copeland Family Foundation, who has been very generous to Milton in the past. And they were, after I sent, I think Laura and I sent the letter maybe a month ago, and middle of the summer. And then just last week, they responded in a big way with a very large check to the town. So that was really tremendous. And I think it shook a lot of people. And every dollar raised is going to go towards shade trees along our streets, within our neighborhoods, along our main streets. And I know Chase actually reached out to me the other day and just touching base and sort of saying, that money in the account, is that for trees? And I'm like, yes, that's for trees, and start using it how you see fit. So I think Public Works is starting to use the funds to buy the trees for this fall. But so I just like to, I don't want to be coy anymore, but so far we've raised over $66,000. And that goes all towards trees. And what, the thing about the trees is that you put them in now and they only increase in value every single year for the next 50, 60, 70 years. So it's a huge investment. 66,000 sounds like a lot of money, which it is, but it's just gonna grow over time, make the community more energy efficient, environmentally friendly, hopefully slows traffic down, makes better neighborhoods, increases property values. So it just hopefully goes on and on and on. So I know you have a long meeting, so I'll end it there. If you have any questions for me, or perhaps Laura wants to say anything.
John, do you want to mention that there'll be a flyer going out in the...
No. So the third phase of the campaign is we're working with the town's Public Works Department, and we have a flyer that will go into everybody's water bill. And it just talks about the celebration of Milton 360 anniversary, how we're the Shade Tree Advisory Committee is raising money for shade trees. And then it just sort of talks about global warming and the environmental impact of trees. And then of course, there's a little coupon area at the bottom where they can mail a check to town if they'd like to support the tree project. That's our final campaign. That's 1, 2, and 3. And then I think at that point we'll be good to go. And hopefully next year at the 360, we can have a ribbon cutting or some sort of post-COVID celebration.
Well, that's wonderful news. Chase, did you want to add anything?
Absolutely, Madam Chair. Thank you. So we are eternally grateful for this effort. It couldn't have come at a better time as far as the budget season and, where tree funding has gone in the last couple of years with us having to tighten the belt. This funding is perfectly timed to pick up that deficit that was there this year. And we, kind of going into a glum year as far as numbers. And when this effort came about, we were very happy to see we can keep pace and even probably exceed our pace from previous years because of this funding. One thing we did put in place is in addition to our own forces being the DPW workers planting trees, we have the ability to access a contract to install even more trees at a faster pace if it looks like the opportunity is there. So we've got that in place now. Amherst Nurseries won the contract, which is the state bid vendor for trees that we use. So we got a great price to get contracted trees installed too.
Okay, well, that's great news. And again, a very generous donation from the Copeland Family Foundation. You didn't mention the amount, John. I don't know if that's...
No, it's public information. The check was for $50,000.
So that was quite substantial. So
That
thank
was
you.
a huge
the
chunk of
foundation.
our goal, but I don't want, the other donations were equally as important. But that certainly is going to make a lot of ground up in the town for trees that have been planted over the past probably decades. So.
Does any member of the board have any comments or remarks? Mr. Doyle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to remind Laura and John, David, to keep the Conservation Commission in mind. We haven't forgotten you. And I also want to go to Chase's point about the contractors who've been working on tree installations in the last couple of years. The take rate has been very impressive. Oftentimes one will hear people complaining about the number of newly started trees that do not survive. That has not been the case in recent years and is very, very important to the community. So compliments on that to the identification and work with the contractors.
Anyone else on this?
I just to give a shout out to Erica DiDonato. She's been our point person and she's been great. And treasurer, I believe it's Jim. He's been very responsive with us too. And certainly Mike Dennehy and Chase Berkeley. And I thank Laura because she's sort of taken me under her wing and said, you want to do this project, that's fine, and usher me around. But it's been great. So just a big thank you, and especially to this board for giving us the go ahead for the project in April.
Well, wonderful news. So thank you very much, Mr. Dennehy.
Madam Chair, very quickly, and I think Member Wells will agree with this one. We're still spending the 350th committee's money, and based on the hard work from Mr. Corey and Ms. Beebe, it looks like we'll be spending the 360th tree initiative money for years to come. So it's not something that's just going to happen this year and discontinue. So I think the amount of fundraising that has taken place is very, 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 very well appreciated, and it will go on for years. So thank you to both of you. Very, very similar in my mind to the 350th and their activism and returning appearances to this board about new projects to spend the money that they also raise. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else before we move on? Hearing none, then thank you both to all of you, Laura, John, and Chase. Thank you for coming in and for this great news and all of your work. All right, have a good evening. We are now on to item 8, which is a report of the Finance Committee, getting ready for the October town meeting. So we'll turn it over to Mr. Zulus and Mr. Doyle.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. As we discussed, I believe at our last meeting briefly, the chief appraiser has estimated an additional amount of new growth on top of what was provided at the May town meeting. An additional amount of new growth totaling $225,000. That amount, I believe, has now been certified by the Department of Revenue. So we have an additional $225,000 for the current fiscal year, which is FY22. Now, at the since town meeting, local aid from the state came in $47,584 short of what we had estimated at town meeting in May. So we had a shortfall based on local aid from what we had estimated in town meeting. So if you take that additional $225,000 and subtract the $47,584 shortfall from state aid, that leaves us with an additional $177,416 of operating revenue, new growth, operating revenue for fiscal year 22, the current fiscal year. Last Friday, the Finance Committee of this board, myself and Mr. Doyle, met with majority of the school committee. I think all the members were there save one. Mr. Dennehy, Ms. Praval, Town Finance Director, Superintendent Gent, and Assistant Superintendent Assistant Superintendent Dexter, Assistant Superintendent for Business. There have been several departments who in town that have pointed out their needs, additional needs arising from an additional funding needs, including the cemetery department, the library, the fire department, the building commissioner, planning board, police department, and the schools. And so it was the goal of the Finance Committee to make a recommendation to this board on how to spend that additional $177,416 of operating revenue. And the Finance Committee did vote a recommendation. I view this recommendation, given the collaboration that we had with the school committee and the school department, as a consensus recommendation from the majority of the school committee, the school department, the town administrator, and in our finance subcommittee. I think this was a consensus view on how to allocate these funds. The recommendation voted by the finance subcommittee was 2 additional school department positions, a Section 504 coordinator, who's responsible for monitoring and implementing the district's compliance with state and federal laws prohibiting disability discrimination. The need there was explained and is quite stark. And second, a speech language pathologist. As you may remember, there were 3 additional positions approved by town meeting last December, but those positions were not funded at town meeting last May, in part because they hadn't been funded, and in part because of the budgetary shortfall. Similarly, we have had 2 police department positions that have been approved but not funded over the last several years because of budgetary shortfall. And so the recommendation of the Finance Subcommittee is to allocate that money as follows: 2 school department positions that I just laid out at a total cost of $89,986. That is the half-year cost, starting in January, of the salary and benefits. We took a conservative view of benefits, assuming that each of these 4 positions would request family benefits, the most expensive. So it's possible that may not be the case, but we took the conservative view. So the amount for the 2 school department positions for the half year is $89,986. The amount for the 2 police officer positions, again, these positions have been approved for several years, have not been funded, and are sorely needed, is $72,000. That left us with, of the $177,416, an additional $15,430, and it is the recommendation of the Finance Subcommittee that additional amount be allocated to the library. As you may remember at town meeting, the library had a $33,000 shortfall in its books and material line, and that put it below the state minimum requirement to receive state aid. And so in order to close that gap and help close that gap, we would allocate $15,430 to the library. Now let me make clear that the 4 positions that are being recommended by the Finance Committee are for half-year positions. And so for these positions to be funded in FY23, it will double the cost. And so it will require additional revenue to cover the cost for these positions. On Monday night, I, along with the several members of the school committee, superintendent, and assistant superintendent for business, appeared before the warrant committee and made that recommendation or told the warrant committee about that recommendation. Warrant committee chair wanted to know what the select board had said about it, and I told Chair Asher that the select board hadn't weighed in yet and would tonight, and that we would make that recommendation. After questioning for about 45, 50 minutes, the warrant committee voted unanimously to support that recommendation. However, the warrant committee does want to hear what the select board thinks and may take a different view, perhaps, if the select board takes a different view. They voted that recommendation, but it was clear that they do want to hear if the select board has a different view. So that's probably a little bit longer and more elaborate and maybe a little less less clear than it could be. But I'll actually Arthur may be able to clear up anything that I messed up.
Nothing to be cleared up, Michael. If you look for an alternative career, we'll put you in finance.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion to support the recommendation of the Finance Committee.
I'll second.
Okay, discussion. Any questions or comments? Ms. Collins, you're up on mute.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I was just curious what the cemetery and did you say the planning board or the planning department? I'm sorry, I didn't quite.
Planning department. Sorry.
Planning department. So I was wondering what they were looking for and whether the library was still looking for the 33,000, just because when we were doing the budget, I had talked to the library director and it didn't seem as if that was as much of an issue as we thought it was in the beginning.
As of September 2nd, the library director made clear that this was still short.
Got it.
And he stated the library would appreciate this being a priority.
Got it. Okay.
And then on the planning department, the request was, just call it up here. The request from the planning department, Tim Zerwinski, was I don't see an amount here, but it looks like Mr. Zawinski was hoping to use some FY22 planning budget to go towards a consultant for the open space program.
And Mike, cemeteries was 12,000 in my notes.
Yeah, cemeteries was their request was an increase of $15,000, and there was an issue about they'd surpassed their limits for space for yard waste,
right?
And they are looking for soil screenings, and the soil screenings they suggested alone could run up to $12,000.
Thank you.
Mr. Jenny,
Madam Chair, if I might, our library director has joined us this evening, if you want to speak to Mr. Adamczyk. And I was going to chime in on both the planning board and cemetery stuff, and just add that these were new requests. These weren't requests that were petitioned back before town meeting as a part of the FY22 budget submission.
If anyone has a question for Mr. Adamczyk or Karen Praval, the finance director, who's also joined us, they can certainly weigh in on those questions that Ms. Collins had. Mr. Adamczyk, is there anything else that you wanted to add in response to that question?
I don't have anything else to add. I will say, like Mr. Dennehy said, this was part of our initial request, and it's still a current shortfall for the library budget as far as state aid goes. And while it does not restore the full amount, when we have to go to the Mass Board of Library Commissioners to possibly get a waiver for not meeting state aid, if that is what occurs, if they see that there was a restoration done, they would look favorably upon that. So, and I'll just put in a cheap plug and say that over the summer, the library had its busiest 2 months that it's had in 5 years. So this will help with all the people coming in and checking out books. So thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Collins.
Mr. Adamczyk, are we in danger though if we don't restore the full 33,000, do you think?
No, I think that what we would do is we would go to the Mass Board of Library Commissioners, show them that an effort was made by the town to restore, and ask permission to use donations to try to fund that gap.
Okay, okay, we can use donations. Great.
And I'm confident about that.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
So I have a little bit of concern about this recommendation, but I wonder, I think it's important that we have the conversation and we bring it out. As Mr. Zulus said, this increase in net growth is certainly welcome news. And anytime we see an increase in revenue, that's a good thing. As we know, new growth will be built into the base. So going forward, the full 250 will become part of our tax levy. The issue here is we're funding 4 positions that are full-time positions, presumably with benefits, and we're treating them that way in this proposal. They're not part-time positions, and we're funding half a year this year with the amount of new growth that we have. It's not an issue for this year, it's an issue for FY23. So in FY23, we're going to have to come up with the second half of the salary and benefits of all of these 4 positions. So, anyone who's been on this board or a town meeting member or anything for any period of time knows that every year, when you add in the steps and lane increases, the contracted negotiations, cost of living increases, we're always starting with a shortfall. There's always a gap. That those steps and lanes and salary increases are always come in higher than what the available revenue is. So I understand the need for both the positions in the police department and the positions in the schools. There's no question on the need for these positions and the library needs. What I'm concerned about is it's a rather, it's for an amount of 177,000. And I think when we get to the warrant, I think there may be a typo in the warrant because the number in the Article 5 recommendation is just slightly different than what Mr. Zulus said. So we may need to fix that in the warrant. The concern I have is carrying this forward and funding it. And so what we're going to have to hope for if town meeting appropriates this money in this fashion is that we have a substantial increase next year, whether it's state aid or whether it's more new growth. And, on one side, you can make the argument that new growth should continue to increase. We have a lot of proposed developments before the town. And Henry's project is going to be coming online. And we think that's going to hit an FY23 revenue. We looked at it. We took a hard look at it last spring as you're going through the budget process and realized it wasn't going to help us in FY22, which is the current fiscal year. That should hit in FY23. Is the thing, a lot of new growth sometimes comes from just single family home improvements, additions. And is that going to continue at the pace it's at? We don't know. So that those numbers, it's a balancing act. The question is, are we going to be able to carry these positions forward? And I think that's a conversation that, it just needs to be, that topic needs to be part of the conversation. We just need to be aware of that. It sounds like Mike made that clear to the warrant committee on Monday evening that these positions are being funded for half of this year. But when we go forward into 23, we're gonna have to come up with revenue to pay the other half of these salaries. So, we can be hopeful that with all the new development projects in town and the pace of activity that Joe Prondak was in talking with us about recently about all the home improvements, we'll continue to keep the new growth number strong so that we'll offset this and we'll have the additional revenue. But it's a little bit of a chance that we take that we could run the risk of needing to cut back some of this next year. And I hope that's not the case. There's certainly a need for the positions. So I just wanted to bring that out. Sometimes when we get a number like this, we could either appropriate the full 177,302, which is what the warrant says, or the 177,4 something like that you meant 416, I think you said.
Yeah.
Or we can estimate it at 175, 170 or 175 and just let the differential flow into free cash or offset a drop elsewhere. You know, if we have a drop in one of the other local receipts during the year, this new growth number could offset it. So I think this is something just for us to keep in mind going forward, more so that if we are in this position where new growth changes by a fair amount, that such that we're thinking about actually doing something at town meeting, that I think we should just keep those issues in mind. So that's, I see Mr. Zulus has his hand raised, but that I wanted to bring that up because that's, when I heard the recommendation, I was a little concerned about the ability to carry this forward into 23. Mr. Zulus.
And just, thank you, Madam Chair. And, you know, it's an important point, and just so we have the number, if all 4 positions choose the most expensive health benefits, we're talking about an additional, again, assuming the number, you know, with the numbers exactly what they are, $161,986. So that would be the additional amount. Put aside the library amount, put aside the $47,000 that we're restoring to the budget that was lost. Question whether that would be necessary, but basically either in revenue or in costs, we would have to find, assuming that these 4 positions seek the most expensive insurance, we'd have to find an additional $161,986. I think the view of the Finance Committee, and Arthur can weigh in, was that given the need, that we thought it was important to go this route.
Mr. Doyle, did you want to weigh in on that?
I just agree entirely, and we understand the position that you put forward, Madam Chair, and have taken an optimistic view of the future, particularly as we approach a post-pandemic environment, and hopefully supply chains are going to free up, and we're going to have continued expansion, growth, revenue production.
Thank you, Mr. Doyle. Mr. Wells.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm being a little parochial here, but a little bit of history. So with regard to the 2 police positions, I think I've stated this before. The police department right now is currently operating at a manning level prior to 1992. The 2 positions that the Finance Committee is recommending, which is what I stated, were voted to put back in a fiscal 2017 town meeting override vote. And they were cut this year, as you know, in the FY22 budget. So for the public, these aren't positions that we're adding. We are restoring the funding for 2 positions that have been recommended and voted by the residents of this town, in which, again, this is the parochial part of me, I direly needed. And I had a long conversation. The chief, I don't speak often, but we had a long conversation about this 2 days ago. And I didn't know what the recommendation was going to be, and I don't think he did either. So I thank them, both members, for that. And I hear you on, no one, I think, articulates the budgetary, or going back to when you were chair of the warrant committee, what you call the budget busters, better than you do. So I get it. But.
Well, no, your point is well taken, Mr. Wells. There's no question about the need for the officers in the police department, or for the school positions for that matter. My concern is just sustainability, and you know, I do put on my old warrant committee hat, and there were an awful lot of lean years where we were cutting staff and laying people off, and that's never far from my mind, because it could happen again, you know, at any given time. But I like Mr. Doyle's approach that we'll be hopeful. I'm eager to see Henry's completed and units sold and get it on the tax rolls, and maybe some of these other projects as they're moving forward. We get the ice house now approved, and that will be coming forward. So there's probably at least in 2024, 25, that time frame, we should have some additional projects coming online that will help, certainly will help.
I would venture, just to continue, Madam Chair, that if it were not for COVID and the impacts it has had on the ability of the Commonwealth to train new police officers over the past 2 years, has really backed things up because of the inability to run recruit classes, we very well may have been laying 2 officers off in July. Had those positions, it's just a stack. Every department is in a queue now, trying to get in. Demands for recruit seats have never been higher just because of COVID. So then going back to, you touched when you mentioned layoffs, that very well we may very well be restoring 2 positions back, 2 people, you know, with names on it tonight versus just refunding the positions.
Thank you. Ms. Collins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just a couple of things. I want to make sure I understand before we vote. The numbers for the 89.9 and 72 don't include health insurance, or they do?
They do include the most expensive health.
The most expensive. That's what I thought you said in the beginning, but then I understood it a little differently. Sorry about that when you said it. Just wanted to make sure that was the
I may have mixspoke.
I doubt it.
We assumed the most conservative, and you know, in the future we may not do that. There was some talk on Friday morning of doing an analysis so that our estimate doesn't always have to be the most conservative estimate, because not everyone takes the most. Some don't take any insurance, some don't take the family plan. But for this purpose, we thought it was important to be the most conservative. So those positions assume the most expensive health plans for each one.
Well, in this case, I'm glad that you took the most conservative
Right.
estimate on health insurance.
Absolutely.
We can hope that that won't be the case, and we'll achieve some savings there. Mr. Dennehy. Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Collins, you had to follow.
That's okay. I just had a separate question, but Mr. Dennehy.
No, and just for edification, the town portion of the family health care plan is $21,886 per year.
Thank you, Ms. Collins.
Thank you. I was just wondering, you know, with the restoration of the 2 police positions, does that help with overtime at all? Which I think we've seen before can actually lower some costs. So, and I think it's probably better for our police officers. They need some downtime. So.
It can in the long run, but just to remember, for a police position, unlike a teacher or many other positions, the first 6 months of your employment is spent in the police academy. So let's say best case scenario, the new recruit costs are coming in this month, September and October, which means the next classes will be January, February. So let's say they get in, optimistically, the chief gets positions in the January, February classes. You're not looking at them graduating until June of next year. So in that aspect of overtime parts, those chips away until they get out.
Thank you.
8:35, so we should probably try to move along. We have a lot of other items on our agenda. Is there anything else on this item? I believe a motion was made by Mr. Wells and seconded by, I forget whom, but I think there was a second by Mr. Doyle. Thank you. All right, so is there any other discussion on this motion? And if not, we'll go to a vote. Mr. Doyle.
Yes.
Mr. Zulus, you're muted.
Yes.
Ms. Collins.
Yes.
Mr. Wells.
Absolutely.
And myself, yes. All right, we also have the cable fund warrant article. Is there anything for the finance committee to report, or is that, thank you, Mr. Adamczyk, and thank you for Ms. Praval for also joining us this evening.
Nothing further to report on that, Madam Chair. Well, the only thing might be that the warrant, it may have been before our last or after our last meeting, that the warrant committee unanimously recommended what this board recommended on the cable fund article.
Okay. All right, then we're on to item 9, which is an approval of the October 25th, 2021 special town meeting warrant. We have the latest draft of the warrant, which I believe is still needs to incorporate the recommendation for Article 5 and maybe some other, but we had talked about adding a map for the first article, which relates to 41 Wharf Street. So I think this is pretty close, but there's probably still some items that we'd like to raise. I know I want to reach out to the chair of the warrant committee about a couple of the comments. Town meeting members are always asking for a little more detail. And there's a relatively short comment on Article 1, 41 Wharf Street, which is the most important of the articles, and one that's really driving going forward in October. There was at one point a reference to being parkland. I think that's been corrected. It's not parkland. And so I want to be sure that, so we're not going to the printer until I believe Monday. So, or maybe Friday, but there's at least a couple more days to fix any typos or make any further changes. And there are a couple of things in here that, in terms of the comments, that I want to reach out to the chair of the warrant committee on to just clarify a few things and add a little bit of context in a few places that I think is just going to generate questions from town meeting members. but we have, it's not incorporated, at least in the latest warrant I saw, but we have a separate draft of a recommendation for Article 5, and I just bring it up because the number again was slightly different than what the Finance Committee reported. The warrant committee is referencing $177,302. So we may just need to check those numbers and fix a typo in this recommendation. I'm assuming that's the case.
Yeah, it's interesting because in George's greeting, he references the 177,416. So we'll reconcile.
Okay, so we'll fix that typo. Did anyone have any comments on the warrant or any questions? I think what we could do is, approve it in substantially this form. And the comments belong to the warrant committee, so they, even though I want to reach out to Chair Asher, but they may or may not decide to make any changes and add any additional context to them. But I think it's worth bringing it up. And as I said, I would like us to add a map. Town Council is working on getting us a map for the first article that at least will show town meeting members where we're talking about at the wharf.
Madam Chair, I'll move to approve the special town meeting warrant for town meeting to be held on October 25th, 2021 in substantially the form presented.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Collins. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor. Mr. Doyle?
Yes.
Mr. Zulus?
Yes.
Ms. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
Yes.
And
I don't know what I'm voting on, but yes.
yeah, the approval of the warrant.
Yes.
And myself, yes. Okay, thank you. All right, so and thank you to the warrant committee and in particular Lynn Hoy, their clerk, who has done a lot of the proofing and the preparation of the document.
Madam Chair, one more thing.
Yes, Mr. Dennehy.
The warrant is going to the printer on Tuesday.
Tuesday. I should have also mentioned to the board that let me just find where it is. We're adding a rather large face, bold and all caps, I think, notice to the general public that the warrant will no longer be available in print form and mailed to each residence. I don't see it in the copy that I have, but I know that Susie and Lynn were working on that yesterday, and I believe it's going to be on the index page. I may be looking at an earlier version. There were a few that came through in the last couple of days. It's not on this one, but that's something that we actually need to think about because the legislation has passed, but not legislation, the Attorney General approval came in, but it came in quite some time after the July 2020 town meeting. We thought it would come in a lot sooner, and we thought that this wouldn't take effect until 2022, and there'd be plenty of time to notify residents. And it ended up, the AG approval was delayed. It was almost a year after the town meeting, and that means that we haven't really notified residents yet of this change that's coming with the warrant not being mailed to each residence. So the question is, do we want to delay the effectiveness of that and just deliver the warrant if we have a winter town meeting and next May's town meeting? If you want to continue to deliver those in print form and give people enough time to get acclimated to the fact that they're going to want to get on the town email distribution to get the notice of the electronic delivery, or do we want this to take effect in January? So we have a placeholder in that large print notice to the residents to fill in. Does anyone have any preference or thought on that? Ms. Collins?
I'd like to give people a little more time. I just think since our timeline was interrupted a little bit and people are also still somewhat challenged by COVID. So I just think it would be helpful to people to have that little bit extra time. I think January is too early. And and maybe we'd want to send out the annual one more time.
Okay, I think that's reasonable. Mr. Zulus?
I agree with that.
Okay, so maybe we'll work with town council for the wording on that. Maybe it'll say something like after the May 2022 annual town meeting, the warrants will no longer be delivered to each resident, something along those lines.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Wells?
Is there a savings involved with that if we don't do it for the annual?
There is a
Yeah.
cost savings. Yeah, that was one of the big reasons to eliminate the delivery.
I know that. So how much is it if we going back to what Ms. Collins said is, so let's say we don't do January, But if we did do it in, if we don't do it in May, how much are we saving by not doing it in May?
Is it like $8,000?
It's, I,
Closer to 10,000.
yeah, it's somewhere in that range.
10,000. I mean, look at the discussion we just had just now about, if we said we had 10,000 right now, I would have all kinds of correspondence tomorrow. I don't know, just,
Although I think that that should still be in the FY22 budget because we didn't have the AG's decision, so it's already budgeted, but it certainly could free up some money on the.
that's my point.
The
It could
cost
free up
was the reason.
10,000.
Yeah, the cost was the reason to go in this direction. On the flip side, we had town meeting members, Leroy Walker and
Joe Sloan. Joe Sloan.
Yes, Joe Sloan, both came in and were met with us and raised a lot of concerns that they had heard from a lot of their constituents in their precincts and really wanted to make sure that there was a significant notice period for residents. So that was the flip side, as to us wanting to delay it a little bit and give enough notice to residents. So, I mean, the arguments on both sides, it's a good point, Richard.
I just, every dollar, 10,000 is like, I'm sure 10,000 is a significant amount of money that we could really need. And I'm just thinking, I'm fine with January, but I think for the annual, I think January, I just think we need it. Every dollar counts right now.
Ms. Collins?
Yeah, I do think that it's important to let January, to send it out in January, but if we give people enough notice and we, maybe send out a postcard or something, I'd be willing to let the annual go. We do have them. We will have some physical copies for people if they need them. So that's something. I don't know. What do other people think?
Why don't I report to town council what this conversation was, and then we'll find a generic way maybe to word it. We can make a decision at a later date of the annual town meeting warrant. Does that work? Okay. Okay, so we're on to item 10, which is a discussion about appointing a celebration of holidays committee. We talked about this at our retreat a few months ago, that this might be one of the areas that we'd like to try to reinstate a committee for. It's been several years since this committee has been in existence. So one time it was a committee that had a budget, and during some prior budget cuts, that funding was taken away and of course never restored. Once you lose the funding, you lose it unless, unless there's some different circumstances that like an override or something that allows you to restore some services. But this committee did exist for a long time and largely helped with planning Veterans and Memorial Day events. But there's been a fair amount of talk at different times over the years that maybe there'd be something where the town could sort of help the Rotary Club, or the Kiwanis Club rather, with the July 4th events. We don't really have many, we just have an event over at the Kelly Field, but a lot of other communities have parades and much bigger events on July 4th. Maybe we have the We Are Milton celebration, which usually right before that, Richard, in recent years. But on the day itself, Milton usually hasn't had, at least in recent memory, many events. There's a tree lighting in December on the deck. There's East Milton merchants all have a Halloween stroll. So there are different events during the year that the chamber at times and others have said it would be nice if the town played a bigger role in them, if we had a little more direction on some of the events. And some of the Memorial Day and Veterans Day, a lot of work goes into those, but we rely largely on the Veterans Director and the Legion to run those events. And if we had a committee, maybe there'd be a little more support for those events and help organizing them. So for the public's benefit, that's kind of what we're talking about. Is there something, does the board want to go in this direction of trying to reinvigorate and reestablish the Celebration of Holidays Committee? And if so, we should talk about, what we think, is it a committee that we'd want to have some funding available for, even a small amount? What might the charge be? What might the membership be? So this is really on our agenda as a first discussion of what members' thoughts are and what we might want to follow up on and bring back to a future agenda.
Madam Chair, is my memory's correct? Chair many, many years ago was a gentleman who was a longtime lector at St. Agatha's. His name was Joe Murray, and he chaired that committee for many years. Is there a charge out there anywhere that you're aware of or that we're aware of?
I asked Jennifer McCullough to take a look through the files. She didn't find an actual charge. She did find a file that had the last membership of the committee from, I think, 2013 or 14, and just some basic information that I'll read it to you. She sent me something that just said its mission was to plan and publish townwide holiday events, especially services for Veterans Day and Memorial Day, and to interface with the community, encouraging its participation in these events. And at the time, there were 6 members on the committee, but she said that wasn't the actual charge. It was just some information in a file that she was able to locate. So we could continue looking, but I'm not sure that we'll have. I don't know. I don't know what the status of, what was there a charge at one time? There probably was, but we may have to do a little more digging through archives.
Too bad Ed Duffy died, Arthur. Didn't know the answer to this. I'm just thinking of him as Katie speaking. I'm like, Eddie Duffy know the answer to this question.
Ms. Collins.
Well, I do like the idea of reinvigorating the committee, just looking at the work that you and Mr. Doyle put into our most recent event, as well as Mr. Wells getting the speaker. And I think that was wonderful, but I think we could use some help. And it just goes to show that there are other opportunities and other things that we need to commemorate and celebrate. I did attend the Milton Substance Abuse Prevention Coalition's now called the Coalition, the training on really partnering with youth. And I think this would be a good first committee for our board to, incorporate a youth leadership in they have a great a model that we can use, and it would be a good opportunity to train some other older people like ourselves and how to do that really well, so that everybody benefits. We benefit from their viewpoint and experience, and vice versa.
So is this something that we may, Mr. Doyle? Mr. Doyle, you're muted.
You're lucky. I just wanted to make 2 observations. One is that it strikes me that such a committee would provide cohesion across the holiday events, along with a mechanism for special events that might occur. The second is that it would be nice to look forward to having this in the post-COVID era, which hopefully isn't going to be too far away. And this could be a nice community mechanism for bringing the community together for holiday events.
So is this something that we are interested in and want to maybe start working on a draft charge and bring back for future discussion? And maybe people who are watching this meeting or reading anything about the coverage, we may hear from residents who would even be interested in serving, or at least would weigh in on whether we should have a holiday committee and whether there's more that we can be doing, and people might even have some suggestions. So we could put this back on one of our October agendas.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Just a follow-up. It might be prudent for you to have a conversation, a personal conversation yourself as chair, maybe you and the vice chair, you and Arthur, with a former member of our board, Kathy Fagan and Linda Lee Sheridan. They were the co-chairs of the 350th. And as you remember, that's probably the biggest undertaking I ever saw this town get involved in that I can remember, at least in my adult life. I know there was the 300th when I was a little kid, but I was not involved in that one other than to go to it. But the 350th was a big, and I think they have a lot of it is played in the those who work in Milton Music Fest now, but like, I think they could really give you some insight on that. I think you might both find it helpful.
I think that's a great idea. Mr. Doyle.
I just wanted to go back to something that I said in Richard's comment and wonder if the title for the committee might not be updated so that it is something along the lines of holiday and community special events.
Okay.
What do they call it in Boston, Mike Dennehy? It's actually a full-time position, Patty Pops. So what do they call that position? It is special about to Mr. That's what just
Yeah,
made me think it
it's
was Arthur
special
said that.
events. Yeah. I'll get the name for it. Ken Brissett and Patty Papa carried that role. I'll find out.
All right, so to be continued at a future October meeting, and I'll make the outreach that Mr. Wells suggested. Thank you. We're on to item 13. I'm sorry, we're on to item 11. 11 and 12 are Conservation Commission agenda items. And I know the Concom was meeting earlier this evening, so why don't we turn it over to Mr. Doyle, who may have a report for us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On September 8th, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency formally proposed to add the Lower Neponset River to the National Superfund priorities list. Now, the Lower Neponset River area that they're talking about is a 3.7 mile stretch moving upstream from the Baker Dam and the Lower Mills to where Mother Brook and the Neponset River emerge in Hyde Park. Based on preliminary studies, this portion of the river contains sediment contaminated with elevated levels of PCBs. The Superfund program protects human health and the environment by investigating and cleaning up often abandoned hazardous waste sites and engaging communities throughout the process. On September 14th, the Conservation Commission unanimously resolved an expression of appreciation commending the EPA for designating the Neponset River as a Superfund site. And we have a motion before us to ask the Select Board, asking the Select Board to endorse that unanimous recommendation or resolution of the Conservation Commission. The Commission, by the way, met today at 5 o'clock, and it suggested an amendation to the motion, recognizing two things. One, there's going to be a public hearing on October 5 for those who would like to learn more about this. And secondly, that public comments on the proposed listing are invited up to November 8th, 2021. So the Concom would like to suggest an amendation to the motion whereby it might read, and I will move it to endorse the unanimous resolution of appreciation by the Milton Conservation Commission commending the EPA for designating the Neponset River as a Superfund site and communicating the endorsement of the Select Board, if that's the action taken, and the Conservation Commission to the Environmental Protection Agency.
I'll second.
Motion's made and seconded. So does the Conservation Commission already have a letter drafted that we could sign on to, or is this a matter of writing a letter?
It would be a matter of writing the letter. It does not yet have a draft. And it did not want to be presumptuous about the action that the Select Board might take.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion on the motion?
Well, I guess one second. Anyone? Oh, I seconded it. Did. Madam Chair, quick question. Do you think it might, Arthur, do you think this might be a unique occasion where we submit one letter?
Yes.
Signed by both of us, both the Conservation Commission and the Select Board? That would have a lot of strength.
That is exactly the intent. You are correct.
I just want to put a capital E in front of endorse. because I'm still in shock that this is going to happen. Is there a time, do we know a timeline on the length of how many months this will take to do? Do we have any idea?
If funded, it would take years.
It will take years to complete.
That's the likelihood, yeah. From startup to closure and post-testing in all likelihood.
I think if funded are the key words there, right? It's
Correct.
or
If
when
funded
funded,
is the key.
maybe, if and when funded.
And that's part of the rationale for having the joint support of the Select Board and Conservation Commission moving forward.
Madam Chair, one other question. Do we know is Boston going to do a similar, because this river is 50-50, half us and half them. Is Boston going to submit a similar letter? Do we know? Do we have any idea of that Concon?
I don't know. Is Mr. Denny, have you heard?
I had a conversation with interim mayor Janney's chief of staff, Chris Osgood, who I worked with in Boston. We're going to regroup early next week. There's a Boston Globe article to be written. So there was a conversation. It's Reverend Mariama is the new Energy, Environment, and Open Space chair for the city of Boston. So there is open dialogue about potentially writing a coordinated letter of support.
We want to eliminate any possibility of the word if. We want when.
That's what we're shooting for.
So we have a motion that's been made and seconded. Any other discussion? I don't know. Maybe should we let the Concom take the lead in drafting this letter, and we could maybe review a draft and weigh in? Does that make sense? I think the Concom probably has more expertise on this topic.
And I was also thinking of communicating with Ian Cook or his staff at the Neponset Watershed to make sure that all of the I's are dotted and T's are crossed.
Okay. All right, then why don't we vote on the motion? All in favor, Mr. Doyle?
Yes.
Mr. Zulus?
Yes.
Ms. Collins?
Yes, and thank you.
Mr. Wells?
Big yes.
And myself, yes. All right, item 12, again, relates to the enforcement orders that we've previously talked about, and we may have an update from Mr. Doyle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, over the past several months, the Conservation Commission has been reviewing its enforcement approaches, and based on community experience and input, using the resources such as the Wetlands Enforcement Manual put out by the Department of Environmental Protection's Wetlands Program. It submits to the Select Board for its consideration wetlands compliance enforcement regulation for the Milton Conservation Commission. The Select Board has the authority to approve the recommendation submitted, and it comes to the Select Board with the unanimous vote from the Conservation Commission this afternoon. If the other approach would, of course, be to go directly into the bylaws themselves, which we don't have to do, but if we went directly into the bylaws, that would require a vote of town meeting. But if the Select Board is inclined to approve the Milton Conservation Commission regulations related to the general wetland bylaw as presented for amendment, then they would indeed take place. They could be given 30-day public notice. We could get input from legal counsel and then come back to the Select Board.
Okay. Any comments from the board? Sounds like a plan.
Madam Chair, if I may, I will move to approve the Conservation Commission enforcement orders as discussed.
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? None, all in favor. Mr. Doyle?
Yes.
Mr. Zulus?
Yes.
Ms. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
Yes.
And myself, yes. Okay, we have a series of committee appointments next on our, and thank you to Mr. Doyle and the Concom.
My pleasure, and my thanks to all of the people who were very candid with us throughout this process. It was extremely important.
Okay, committee appointments. We have the Capital Improvement Planning Committee first. Anyone like to make a motion?
I move to reappoint William F. Ritchie, CPE, LCS of 525 Canton Avenue, Michael Hale of 500 Brook Road, John Focarelli of 361 Center Street, Richard G. Wells Jr. of 525 Canton Ave, Elaine Craighead of 525 Canton Ave, Kathleen A. Cassis of 115 Granite Place, and Karen Preval of 525 Canton Ave to the Capital Improvement Planning Committee for a one-year term ending 9/30/2022.
Second,
All in favor? Mr. Doyle,
Yes.
Mr. Zulus,
yes.
Ms. Collins,
Yes.
Mr. Wells.
I'll abstain on that one, Madam Chair.
Okay, and myself, yes. Historical Commission.
Madam Chair, I'll move to reappoint Linda Weld of 267 Adams Street and Frederick McFadden of 12 Spafford Road to the Historical Commission for a two-year term ending September 30th, 2023.
Second.
All in favor? Mr. Doyle,
Yes.
Mr. Zulus,
Yes.
Mr. Wells,
Yes.
Ms. Collins,
Yes.
myself, yes. The In-Service Safety and Training Committee.
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion to reappoint Tom McCarthy, Jack Calabro, and Dean Alexander of 525 Canton Ave to the In-Surface Safety and Training Committee for a two-year term ending 9/30/2023.
Second.
All in favor? Mr. Doyle,
Yes.
Mr. Zulus,
Yes.
Ms. Collins,
Yes.
Mr. Wells,
Yes.
myself, yes. And the Pilot Committee is our last committee.
Madam Chair, I'll move to reappoint Michael D. Dennehy of 525 Canton Avenue, Matthew Keswick of 76 Buckingham Road, C. Robert Reitz of 222 Highland Street, and Jennifer Hine of 453 Elliott Street to the Payment in Lieu of Taxes Committee for a one-year term ending September 30, 2022.
Second.
All in favor? Mr. Doyle,
Yes.
Mr. Zulus,
Yes.
Ms. Collins,
Yes.
Mr. Wells,
Yes.
myself, yes. Thank you. We are on to one-day liquor licenses. We only have one this evening.
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion to approve a one-day liquor license for the trustees of the reservation for concerts to be held at Hutchinson Field on Adams Street on October 9th, 2021.
Second,
All in favor? Mr. Doyle,
Yes.
Mr. Zulus,
yes.
Ms. Collins,
Yes.
Mr. Wells,
Yes.
and myself, yes. Okay, meeting minutes. We have 4 dates for which we have meeting minutes. I know I sent over some changes to Susie Stewart that I believe have been made at least to the August 17th and September 15th minutes, and I haven't had a chance to look at the others. Did anyone have, and we've added a list of documents at the end, at least to those two. I haven't looked at all of them yet.
Madam Chair, I'll move to approve the meeting minutes from August 17th, 2021 and September 15th, 2021.
Second.
Second, all in favor? Mr. Doyle,
Yes.
Mr. Zulus,
Yes.
Ms. Collins,
Yes.
Mr. Wells,
Yes.
myself, yes. August 25th, there's just one area regarding, it was the meeting with the Conservation Commission on the enforcement orders that I was trying to find that tape, and Susie was able to find it today. I didn't really get a chance to go back today and look at it, but I think the minutes are in good shape, other than we need to just fill in that one. Be sure that the description is accurate. Okay, so we'll defer the minutes of the other 2 dates, August 25th and September 8th. Town Administrators Report, Mr. Dennehy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And members of the board, very briefly, so this board tasked me about a month ago with working with the Diversity, Equity, and Social Justice for All Committee to put out a request for proposals for consultants. That process culminated with 6 proposals having been submitted by the due date of September 15th. Late last week, myself, Pat Lattimore, the chair of the DEI, Karen Praval, our Finance Director, and Paige Eppolito, Human Resources Director, began the process of reviewing those 6 proposals. I hope to bring back a finalist to this board at our next meeting, if not, if we have a meeting prior to that. So each of us are taking a look at this and are regrouping early next week to talk about our thoughts and learn some of the best practices. The very wide group of requests for proposals were submitted, some more complex than others, some more robust than others. So we'll have to work through that process and hopefully bring sooner rather than later a recommendation to this board soon. And second item is very similar to the word snow and talking about snow in September. We're going to begin to start talking about the FY23 budget and capital improvement planning. So at the next meeting on October 13th, I'd like to have an agenda item to discuss some of the process and procedure involved in FY23's budget submission, knowing that the old man winter is coming and we normally get this process underway in early December, understanding that we're probably going to have a special town meeting in January, which will put our warrant committee under pressure, and then the multitude of meetings that take place with respect to annual town meeting and all the budget proposals that they have to review and participate in. So I just want to get the ball rolling on that. Obviously, we've got a new finance director, so just move our way through that process sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Okay, and just related to that, we can put it on the October 13th agenda for further discussion, but what I'd like us to get back in the habit of is bringing the budgets to the meeting, so that it used to be that years ago, before we changed the, delegated some of the authority to the town administrator, that the board would be signing each and every budget that was under the select board. And we kind of got away from that and kind of focused on the overall budget, but I think the micro budgets are important, that they come to our meetings. It used to be that the TA would present each of the budgets and talk about what was different. Some of the smaller budgets, the Board of Appeals, that doesn't change much from year to year, but any of the significant, the large budgets, there are year-to-year changes. And I don't think that the board needs to go back and sign every single budget, but especially in COVID, while we're meeting remotely, but it's good for the public's edification as well as for members of the board to fully understand what's in the budgets that are being proposed. And the school committee does do this. So I think it was probably, I think we probably needed to continue doing that, and we got away from it when the TA, the legislation requires the town administrator to present an overall budget to the warrant committee and to our board. But I think probably the board stepped away a little bit too much from the budget process. So I want to be sure that everybody's, aware, sees the budgets, gets copies of them, and it has an opportunity to ask questions about them at a meeting. So we could put them back, put a few on for the second meeting in October, put a few of them on in each of the November meetings, and we should be able to get through them all. Some of them won't require a lot of discussion, but that would be one of my thoughts for the planning for this year. And anything else on this item for tonight? Okay.
That's all I have this evening. Thank you, Madam.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dennehy. Then we're on to the chair's report, and I just wanted to give a very brief update just for the public, but also so we're all on the same page. Obviously, everyone knows that the 40B comprehensive permit application for the ice house at 485 Blue Hills Parkway was approved. We all received a copy of the Board of Appeals' decision, so that's good news for the town. We had weighed in support of that a couple of years ago. Our then chair, Mr. Zulus, and then vice chair, Ms. Collins, and the chair of the planning board, Cheryl Tagayas, had met with that developer, Mr. Bosworth, and his colleagues, and asked for some retail space to be restored at the property and for some changes to the design and the footprint of the building. And Mr. Bosworth was very willing to work with the town and came back with a proposal that served those objectives. So I think the ice house is a good story for the town. 582 Blue Hill Avenue and 648, 652 Canton Avenue are still working their way through the Board of Appeals process. There's a hearing on 582 this evening. That one seems to be likely to come out of the evidentiary portion fairly soon. 648, 652 Canton Avenue has undergone a substantial redesign. And at the meeting last evening, it was agreed that the town's peer reviewers working with the Board of Appeals and the applicants, experts, and perhaps some of the neighborhoods experts would have a working group session and try to see if they can further refine that project and get to a better result. And then 728 Randolph Avenue is the most recent one to be filed with the Board of Appeals. They're going to open that. I think there's a hearing next week or in the very near future, just to hold the first hearing. And it's only going to be a logistical meeting. And then like Amore Road and Brush Hill, that one will be just continued in a pending status until probably, and the most likely one is 582 Blue Hill Avenue being wrapped up and coming out from before the Board of Appeals. So right now, the smaller applications are all on hold, for lack of a better word. Well, major projects are in front of the Board of Appeals, and they've had a very busy workload. So some progress being made on those, especially with the ice house, which was a good result for the town. We've already covered item 17B. I also wanted to mention at the beginning of this meeting that we're going through a transition and a reorganization in the office. We're going to have a new employee taking over for Jennifer McCullough, whose last day was yesterday, and she has moved over to Milton High School in a role with the school department. So we'll have a replacement for Jennifer McCullough, the licensing agent. Unless Mr. Dennehy has anything he would like to add on that, we'll have something maybe to either introduce Jennifer's successor or mention the new person at a future meeting, Mr. Dennehy.
Sure. So thank you, Madam Chair. So Suzanne Bridges is the successor as the contract and licensing agent for the town. She actually started today at Town Hall. Very smooth transition. Yeah, so I'd like to bring her in on October 13th, if we could, to introduce her. There's a litany of stuff on our agenda that passes through that very important position at Town Hall. So I want to welcome Suzanne. Now we have two Suzannes in the office.
For a little while, we have two Suzannes in the office. So thank you to Jennifer McCullough for her years of service to the board. We had a nice farewell reception for her yesterday morning at Town Hall, and she made a lot of contributions in her 3 years with the board and in two different roles. So she will be missed, and we wish her well in the school department and in her new role. And sadly, Suzanne Stewart, who has been with the board at our meetings for the last several months, is going to be stepping down from her position, and we're going to miss Susie and all of the great work that she's done. The Bloodmobile just keeps coming to the top of my mind because that was a lot of effort for the September 11th observance, and Susie not only organized it and helped run it, but she was the one who proposed it to us in the first place, and that was a terrific addition to the board's remembrance of the 20th anniversary of September 11th. So, and Susie's been doing an awful lot of work in the office. We know how challenging it is to be doing night meetings, especially in the remote context, and on top of all of the work that there is in the office during the daytime. So we're going to miss Susie, and Susie, the other members of the board may want to weigh in. I just wanted to wish you well and thank you for all of your efforts on behalf of the board and let you know you're going to be missed. Would anyone like to address either the Jen or Susie? Mr. Wells.
Madam Chair, Susie wasn't with us long, but I want to thank her for her humor and her efforts as you did. She's gone before her feet. Even she's got her shoes wet. She's already gone, which is a sad thing. To Jen's point, obviously she was with us a little bit long, and I never knew her. As Mr. Dennehy knows, I recommended her when someone came to me and told me she was applying. I had only heard of her. I had never actually met her, and I think we can all say, and I think everyone in Town Hall, including Susie, everyone who's ever been in the office knows that Jen, not just in her work ethic, came into this role as an employee of the town with her entire heart and smile. Everything she could put into it, whether or not, she didn't leave until almost 11 o'clock last night, even though she finished at 4 o'clock yesterday, because she wanted to have all her I's dotted and her T's crossed. And I'm profoundly sad when I see people who we as leaders, we want to have great people following us, working for us. We're only as good as those who do the job. I'm sad to see her leave because I think that we lost a great opportunity for someone, even though she's only gone through the schools, we lost a great opportunity. Someone who really would have been a future. In my 30 some odd years with this town, that role's only changed. It only changed once from Carol Boot to Anne Marie Fagan, and just sad to see it turn over so quickly. So Susie, I wish you the best, and Jen, you as well. You will both be missed. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. Mr. Doyle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just extend the same sentiments and add to them recognition of their willingness to take on any task presented and the cheerfulness with which they did so.
It's always important. Mr. Zulus.
Just one thing I'll add, we've talked about what a great contribution Susie made with the Bloodmobile. We talked earlier about the electronic warrant article that passed town meeting, and we'll end up saving money for the town of Milton, and that was Jen McCullough from start to finish. And so for everything, we owe her a great debt of gratitude, but also for taking that project, coming up with it, initiating it, and seeing it through to the finish. So thank you for both. And Susie has been not only in serving this board, but you know, I can tell you every Monday at 8 a.m., Susie's been there to start the Zoom meetings for the Municipal Broadband Committee, and so it's been much appreciated. And that committee and the Finance Committee, and she's been able to keep those things moving. So so that's been much appreciated.
Okay, Ms. Collins.
I'll try to be brief. I just wanted to thank Susie because you jumped in with both feet and really started right off the bat. So I think that you don't know how important that was for the board when Hillary left. And I really appreciate all your initiative. And that's something that you and Jen have in common. Again, the warmth and the initiative there. Jen was always looking to learn something new and to share it with everyone. So something that I really appreciated, and I think we all benefited from greatly. And thanks to all my colleagues for your great words for both of them.
We have a few more days with Susie, but she will be missed once she leaves. Okay, I have nothing else to report. Does anyone have a report this evening? Mr. Doyle?
None, Madam Chair.
Mr. Zulus?
No report, Madam Chair.
Mr. Wells?
No, Madam Chair.
Ms. Collins?
No, thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, public comment response. We did not have any public comment this evening. Our future meeting dates, the next ones are October 13th and then October 27th, which is the same week as the town meeting. We'll probably want to add a meeting on the 25th at a half hour, an hour before the town meeting, as we usually do. Any future agenda items?
Madam Chair, I will, as we have a town meeting article going forward in October, the landing committee's been meeting every other week now, and we're trying to put together a three-phased approach going forward. Once that's completed, as far as developing any RFP going forward for what we had tried to do, which we actually issued back in 19 to no avail, but we're already working on that. And in addition to that, Allison Quinn, Tim have been attending our meetings and working on coming to the board with phases for some of the recommendations that were handed from the MPIC, which you received from all the work you did with the MAPC back from like 2015 to 2019.
Okay, so we may have some future agenda items.
Yeah, so I would say sometime in October, we will have an future agenda item there.
Okay, did anyone else have Mr. Dunhee?
I have three. I think we should bring in the Veteran Services Director for his quarterly report and an update on Veterans Day planning. The clerk is nearing the process with the re-precincting and the vote that this board's going to have to take Not sure if it's going to be ready for early October, but certainly one of the two meetings this month. And then I think it would be prudent to bring in Fire Building Committee recently, about a month ago, Marina Fernandez and Tim Zerwinski sent around a letter to this board about some of the plans for the fire building process and just what that means to some of the town organizations as they review that, as they very similar to how they review 40B plans. So I think it would be a worthwhile discussion as an agenda item, just to kind of get an update and just kind of find out what the process and procedure looks like, understanding that Public Works and our planning director and fire department may have some concerns with the current plans or some comments to make.
Okay. All right, good. Anything else? Then we'll move on to community happenings. I'm not aware of anything. Well, Mike's 5K, we heard about that last night at Laurie Stillman's retirement celebration. So that's coming up. We heard the date earlier this evening and I did not write it down, but
October 16th, which is
October
a Saturday.
Okay, so it's a great event, raises a lot of money for the coalition, raises a lot of awareness too.
We also have Milton's Goal for Gold, but I wish I had more details to give you on it right now. Are you aware of that, Michael,
I've
as
heard
well?
of that. I don't know much about it, but I've seen social media posts about it.
Yeah, there's
I
a great
am, and
video.
There are
Great video
sandwich
they
boards out around town as well. I saw one at St. Agatha's today.
There are houses getting glowed in my
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a lot. I have a lot of paraphernalia around my house, but maybe, Michael, there's a great video that was produced by the committee and collaboration with the public schools last week. They would get that up on the town's website. It's a great video. Chief King's in as well. Chief Madden is the firefighters. It's very good.
Okay. All right. We have an executive session, but we also have Governor Stoughton, and I see we have Julie Kramer, who's been waiting for a while. So why don't we recess the meeting of the select board and we'll go into a meeting of the Governor Stoughton Trust, and we'll come back to the select board meeting then to go into our executive session and adjourn from the executive session. And that way we'll keep the meeting continuous on the local television station. So we'll recess the select board meeting, and I don't know if we need a vote for that. Have we done a vote usually for that?
Sure.
To recess?
Want to do it just to be safe?
Sure. All in favor of recessing the select board meeting? Mr. Doyle?
Yes.
Mr. Zulus?
Yes.
Ms. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
Yes.
Myself, yes. We will be back to the select board meeting, but now we are going to call to order a meeting of the trustees of the Governor Stoughton Trust. And we can move Julie Kramer up from attendee to panelist. And the first item is a request from the trustees of the Affordable Housing Trust for $300,000, a contribution to the Affordable Housing Trust from the Governor Stoughton Trust. So Julie Kramer will speak to that. Julie's just joining us. I will just let the board know I am a member of the Affordable Housing Trust. The statute requires a member of the board to be on that trust, to be one of the trustees. And I decided to recuse myself from this discussion of the Affordable Housing Trust on Monday morning because whoever's the select board member is really wearing two hats here. And you know, most communities don't have something like this, a Governor Stoughton Trust. This is a bit unusual. So I decided to be recused while the rest of the trustees, the other four, had a discussion around this item so that I could take part in the discussion as a Governor Stoughton trustee. So,
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Wells.
Just a point of legal clarification for me. As you know, when you and I and Mr. Burns were on the board, this was something that came before us before. Are we all right on this legally to make such a transfer? Are we okay with this?
Well, I think we should hear from Ms. Kramer, and then my suggestion is maybe we talk with town council because Ms. Collins has been having some discussions with the Attorney General's office, but I think we should hear from Julie Kramer, who's the chair of the Affordable Housing Trust, and then we can consider what we might want to do. And Ms. Collins may want to weigh in on with some of the benefit of her discussions with the AG's office. We do not have town council with us this evening.
Okay.
So, Ms. Kramer, thank you for waiting for a long time.
No problem. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the Select Board. For those of you who have been involved in the Affordable Housing Trust. I'd like to just give a preview of what an Affordable Housing Trust, the role of an Affordable Housing Trust in many municipalities and towns. It's a trust fund set up to help facilitate the creation and preservation of affordable housing. It is funded in a way that allows some flexibility in how the funds are brought to bear in projects or in local initiatives. So we had a meeting on Monday, a 9 a.m. meeting on Monday with the Affordable Housing Trust to discuss the request into the Governor Stoughton trustees for funding of $300,000 of the sale proceeds from the Pulte purchase of the Poor Farm to fund the Affordable Housing Trust. The the need for these funds is apparent because the need for affordable housing is so critical right now in Milton. These funds would help to allow the Affordable Housing Trust to act quickly and appropriately when needed on affordable housing developments or potentially to bring resources to other development opportunities, to negotiate potentially some greater affordability, maybe in exchange for less density, for instance. Also to facilitate the development of various town-owned parcels or state-owned parcels in Milton. The possibility to work to create the MBTA communities, which, as you know, is required by the Zoning Act, and support development of those MBTA communities. And, there always remains the possibility of rehabbing existing homes to create or to convert those to affordable housing. So there's a lot that these funds can do to support affordable housing in Milton. And we respectfully request these funds be used to fulfill the will of Governor Stoughton to benefit the poor of Milton. I'm here to answer any other questions you might have.
I'm on mute. Okay, thank you very much, Julie, for that report. Does anyone have any comments or questions for Julie? Ms. Collins.
So I think we all know because we've discussed it, and I believe the Affordable Housing Trust also knows this, but in recent discussions with the AG's office, it was mentioned preemptively without us even bringing this up that the Governor Stoughton Trust was not to, the sale proceeds were not to be used to capitalize the Affordable Housing Trust. So I think I definitely would need guidance from town council. I understand that funds are needed. I'm very excited that that the CPA got passed, and I'd love to see more money going to the Affordable Housing Trust. It's just, it's taken a year plus to get the AG's office to sign off on affordable housing on town farm. I'm very concerned about jeopardizing that. That's a project that we could have while right now, there's over $600,000 in the Affordable Housing Trust. And I don't know, I mean, I realize that $1 million is a different number and maybe has a different connotation. I just need a little more guidance. And I don't know if maybe Judy Barrett could be helpful Also, or Kathleen O'Donnell, who is an attorney for many affordable housing trusts. Maybe they could, if it's something that the Governor Stoughton trustees would like to do, maybe they can help us formulate some kind of argument to demonstrate so that we could go forward with something like this. But I would need something to give me some level of comfort to do that. Thank you.
And if I can just add something to that, to your comment, Melinda, the amount that we're asking for to fund the Affordable Housing Trust in no way touches the principal of the money that is sitting currently in the Governor Stoughton Trust. So as all of you are well aware of, the sale to Pulte resulted in $5.35 million. And there is, some belief that some or most of that principal should be left untouched and should not be used to fund the Affordable Housing Trust. The $300,000 number that I'm requesting here represents interest gained on that affordable housing, interest gained on the Governor Stoughton Trust funding, the sale proceeds. And so we have, we feel comfortable, and of course, we need the attorneys to all weigh in, that by requesting that amount, we are still living within the confines of the agreement to not, to keep a balance in that fund.
Yes, Ms. Collins, and then we have Mr. Wells and Mr. Doyle.
Yeah, I just think that Jonathan Green's words were not to use the Governor Stoughton Trust to capitalize the Affordable Housing Trust. So that's why I would just feel better about clarifying that.
All right.
And I think we heard something different, but definitely need clarification.
All right, so we should get clarification on that point, but when we go to Mr. Wells and then Mr. Doyle.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. And Julie, I hear your concerns. So going back to when I was on the Affordable Housing Trust, we tried a similar, when I followed Tom Hurley, there was a letter already drafted. When I got there, we were going to submit it to the board for a vote then. And John Flynn was town council, and he had discussions with the Attorney General's office, and the answer was unequivocally no, to the point that John told me not to sign the letter. But my concern is all this work, all these years, you've just got the door cracked on potentially being able to use, this 4 acres for affordable housing project. I think coming right in and now trying to do something that just 5 years ago we were told absolutely not. I have concerns about doing that. I'd rather see us get through what you've got started here and get that completed, than maybe then try and go back. But I think doing one before coming back with what we already knew was a no before, and trying to do it right on the heels of what a door that you've, as I said, just got cracked open to start. I don't want to jeopardize that at all. And you may not want to hear that from me, but I don't want to see that happen.
So, all right, Mr. Doyle, let us hand up, and then Mr. Zulus. I think there's a big,
Mr. Zulus, go.
well, I think that before we get to, I think there's a difference here between the 2.5 million and the current request, which is substantially lower than that. And
it wasn't the money, it was the point, Madam Chair,
Yeah.
was that they were like, absolutely no.
yeah, so we need to get some further guidance here from legal counsel, who's not on the call with us, but this is an opportunity for Julie to come in this evening and make the request. All right, Mr. Doyle, you want to go to Mr. Zulus next?
Yes, that'd be fine.
Mike.
So I'm very much in favor of this request. I think the way to help the poor of Milton with shelter and housing is not for this money to be sitting in a bank account. It's to put it to use. And so I am very much in favor of this. I don't understand how a determination by the trustees for the use of funds could somehow jeopardize the attorney, an assistant attorney general's view on something else. It shouldn't have any impact at all. I would be surprised if the attorney general were to take the view that money that could be used to help the poor and shelter for the poor should be sitting in a bank account rather than being used to do that. Indeed, back in 2013, when this issue was brought to court for how to use this and how to seek a deviation for this, it is true that the town of Milton said that the deposit of the net proceeds of the sale, the Pulte sale, this is from what the town submitted, the proceeds would be of the sale would be put into the Governor Stoughton Fund to be held as an endowment fund administered by said trustees, the income and appreciation of said fund to be used for the benefit of the town of the poor of Milton, as the Milton Board of Selectmen, as acting as the trustees of the will of Governor Stoughton, shall determine. All right? And the Attorney General's office, in their answer and assent, which was adopted by the court, acknowledged that this deviation to allow the sale would be used to, quote, generate $5 million, which the trustees, us, would then direct to the benefit of the town of Milton residents in need of shelter, food, and other necessities of life consistent with the trust's intended purpose. So it's clear to me, as a Governor Stoughton trustee, that it is more than appropriate to use this funding for that purpose, to use the income and appreciation of this fund for that purpose. I don't know Jonathan Green, other than him being an assistant attorney general. If he says no, that's nice. Be nice if he agreed, but if he doesn't agree, that's fine. We have an obligation as trustees of the Governor Stoughton Trust to make our own determination. I think we should consult with town council on what the amount would be, but it's clear to me that affordable housing for the poor of Milton meets the definition of how to use this funding for the poor of Milton. Indeed, it was acknowledged by the Attorney General back in 2013. So I don't see how there could be any dispute of that. So I'm very much in favor of this. The number we need to make sure we get right, that it's income and appreciation. And so we need to make sure that that number is right. But I think, pardon me, from the numbers that I've seen, with my understanding, and we'll have to get this clarified, it was 5.35 million for the sale, and now there's approximately, or as of June 30th, there was 5.67 million in the fund. So it's just shy of 300, but we'll have to get that clarified. But I would be in favor of whatever that number is, to put this money to use for the poor of Milton and for shelter and housing for the poor of Milton.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Doyle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate this conversation and the comments of all. I would like to suggest, please, that a request proposal be submitted to the trustees in writing, no more than 2 pages, outlining many of the points that were presented, including uses of the money for leverage and partnership with other entities that would engage in the expansion of affordable housing in the town of Milton. And also a focus on how those monies might be used in a startup respect as one option for the 4+ acres that we have. I have a personal desire to see something there before I'm in Milton Cemetery. This debate has been going on for decades, and I think it's incumbent upon us as trustees, and I admit I'm a newbie in that respect, to use the money, to borrow the word that Michael employed. From my perspective and experience, money is to be used. It is to be used gainfully, productively, and successfully. It should not lie fallow. And again, if we could shape out something that is more specific, more concrete, that we could then submit to legal counsel rather than a 1 or 2 sentence resolution with some supporting dialogue, that would be much more meaningful to me. So that's my recommendation or suggestion.
Okay, Ms. Collins, why don't we go to you, and then I have some thoughts on this as well. And it is getting to be 9:45, so we have an executive session ahead of us. So, Ms. Collins.
Chair. I agree. The money should be used. As I said, I want to see the Affordable Housing Trust capitalized. And I do also want to see Town Farm used for affordable housing. My other concern is that we might actually be able to use part of our funds to help with that project. I spoke with Ms. Kramer about that already, and it may not be needed. But again, I'm just looking for some guidance so that we do everything in the correct manner. And I like the idea of having a formal written request. As Mr. Doyle suggested, I think that documenting what those uses could be will be really powerful. So thank you.
Thank you. So my thoughts on this are the Affordable Housing Trust is currently capitalized. It's approximately $645,000. I think everyone's brought up some good points. And Ms. Collins, I want to support her she's been having some recent discussions with the Attorney General's office. And it may be that, that we want to go back and revisit some of those issues. In any event, we need to get guidance from Town Council and the AG on this to be sure that we're sure that we've done our appropriate due diligence. At the present time, there's not a specific project before the Affordable Housing Trustees. I think Julie's made the case that if they have approximately $1 million in assets, that's going to give them some leverage and put the Affordable Housing Trust in a position where it can do a little bit more. And the lack of funding in the Affordable Housing Trust has been the problem until very recently. It has not been capitalized well at all. So the Affordable Housing Trust, I think a prime source to fund the Affordable Housing Trust going forward is going to be the Community Preservation Committee that was just passed last year. And that should probably be the primary source of funding, as well as projects that are paying into the Affordable Housing Trust in lieu of building affordable housing. It would be nice if we had a specific project that we could target the money to. And I think back to the way the Warrant Committee occasionally would handle the reserve fund, where the department would come in and maybe make a request. Remember there was one year when I was on that Warrant Committee when the school committee came into us and said, we might need $90,000 for school buses. We want you to set it aside. We don't want to take the money right now, because once you transfer the money out, it's in the school budget for the rest of the year. And they came back to us and they ultimately didn't need it. So the Warrant Committee during the course of that for several months carried a set aside where the committee said, okay, we're going to set aside these funds, reserve them, knowing we've got this request from the schools out there. I think we might take a similar approach in this case, where ideally we'd have a project that, or something that we were working towards, because right now the request is very general. The good news from the AG's office has been we're in a position to be able to do something with the 4 acres, at least put out a request for proposals and see what we might get in the area of affordable housing. And that's something that Melinda and Julie have both been working hard on and planning. So we have the request tonight, and we should get the additional guidance, be sure that we're comfortable with what our ability is. That the 5.35 million were the sale proceeds from Pulte. We had about $300,000 in the account before. I want to check with the treasurer, because my understanding, and it could be wrong, was that some of that was considered principal that we couldn't touch. So I think there's some due diligence that we have to get done here. But there should be something that we can do for the Affordable Housing Trust, I think, from the Governor Stoughton Fund. The question is probably how much, and should it be targeted toward a specific purpose, if not, and not just a general transfer at this stage. But Julie's made the case that it gives them additional leverage. So that might be something that we can consider and explore further. Mr. Zulus.
3 very quick points, Madam Chair, and I appreciate you indulging me. According to the treasurer, $195,000 is the amount that can't be spent on.
That sounds familiar.
So that's one point. Point number 2, I think it's very important that the Affordable Housing Trust be capitalized as best we can so that the Affordable Housing Trust has a seat at the table and is taken seriously by developers. It's not going to happen. We can sit here and say, well, maybe we'll appropriate the money. A developer is going to take the Affordable Housing Trust seriously if it is well capitalized. That's point number 2. And point number 3, as for going to the AG's office, as far as I'm concerned, the Attorney General's office in their court filing from 2013 has weighed in and said that the trustees would direct this for the benefit of residents in need of shelter. And to me, that is determinative and dispositive, and maybe an assistant attorney general somewhere along the line disagrees, but I think that's dispositive. I see no need to go beyond town council for advice on this.
I think we're all in agreement on point 2, certainly. Everybody wants to see the Affordable Housing Trust capitalized. We've been trying to do that through town meeting appropriations, and I want to give Melinda Collins and others credit who are on the Housing Committee, who, including Julie and Tom, who did a lot of work with Northland to get some of that recent 300 or so $1,000 into the Affordable Housing Trust. That wasn't a given, and it wasn't going to happen automatically. That's something that really was negotiated for through the efforts of the Housing Trustee and the Affordable Housing Committee and the Affordable Housing Trust. It's getting late, so that's there's a lot of ways of funding the Affordable Housing Trust, and I think community preservation. To me, that was the main reason to pass community preservation, and that's probably the primary funding source. But there is something that I think we can do through Governor Stoughton, and hopefully we can tie it into something with the 4 units, because the 4 acres, because that's what the Housing Committee is focused on currently. Mr. Doyle.
Madam Chair, I'm not opposed to any of these important goals. I just don't know that I'm ready to take a vote on this tonight, and wonder if we might defer it for a short period of time until we have the case built, well thought out, and well assembled and reviewed.
Yes, it sounds like we have some due diligence we want to do with town council. Mr. Wells.
Madam Chair, I know Mr. Zulus wasn't here, but it may be prudent if town council to talk with former town council, John, because as you know, this goes all the way back to Joanna Soares, then Mary Beckham, John the Green. No one understood this kind of more than Joanna Soares did, and Mary followed her. So no disrespect to you, Michael. I felt the same way you did until the door got slammed in our face 3 years ago. And my John Flynn will have a lot to add on this as far as the AG's point. And I'm not saying it's not. I just don't want to see us try to do something and the AG come back and say don't. So.
And look, the AG can take a different position. You know, the trustees of the Governor Stoughton's trust can take a different position from the Attorney General's office. And if the Attorney General wants to come in and say, leave that money in the bank account, don't use it for affordable housing for the poor, and wants to take the trust to task, I would welcome that.
I think the concern, just my final point was, and you remember this as well, Katie, was making the nexus between affordable housing and the poor. And Judy, Julie, you remember this as well. That was trying to make that. They weren't making it. So John Flynn's really the guy who, to me, will have the legal answers to. He did most of the yeoman's work in the school over the years.
Yeah. So the good news here is I think we have 5 trustees of the Governor Stoughton Trust who are all looking to see if there's something that we can do for the Affordable Housing Trust. And hopefully, 2.5 million is a lot different than the $300,000 request. So it should be, Julie, thank you for coming in and presenting this to us tonight, making the pitch and making the case, and we'll do some additional due diligence and put this back on a future agenda.
Okay, and I will get a written request into you.
Mr. Doyle asked for that. Was that the general consensus of the board? It seems to me the request is already in, but that's fine if you want to do that. I'm not sure, Arthur, whether you were asking for specific use of the proceeds or just a written request for the 300.
I want to see more than a written request. I want to see purpose. Much of what was discussed, outlined, and visible. We can't not have something of that nature to present to town council for review. What is town council going to review? It has to be more than a request for $300,000.
Okay. All right.
In my estimation, but I'm only one person. So
okay. I see people nodding their heads, so it sounds like we might have agreement on that. So Julie, if you want to get started on that, that would be helpful. All right. We had on the discussion, on the agenda, also a discussion of the RFP, the request for proposals for a potential affordable housing development. I don't know if Ms. Collins or Ms. Kramer has any update on that. There may not be anything new to report on that item.
I can just give you, there's a timeline. I know Mr. Zerwinski it either has or is imminently going to reach out to Ms. Kramer so that she can give her excellent guidance on what really is feasible economically, so that we craft something that the marketplace can really respond to. And the timeline is to have some public process in, I think, November, and then be ready to release an RFP by the end of the calendar year.
I did have a call with Tim and Allison today, and it was a really great discussion. We pinpointed a few avenues to help us, get the ball rolling, and also discuss the various funding that could be brought to bear on the project, and even talking about affordability levels, etc. So we had a good call today.
All right, thank you both for your efforts on that front. We have meeting minutes of August 25th for the Governor Stoughton Fund. We had actually approved these previously because they were included in the regular board minutes of August 25th. So Susie has broken them out into a separate document for us. We normally approve Governor Stoughton minutes separately. So these are the exact same minutes that actually, I think we have seen the drafts. We've not approved the August 25th minutes. They were among the ones that we deferred earlier this evening, but we've seen the drafts. So let me correct that. The board has had a copy of this previously, but it's now been broken out into a separate meeting document, minutes document. So if we have any changes we want to make on these minutes, we should consider that now. It's just a one paragraph set of minutes substantively. We could act on these or we could defer them.
I had no comments, Madam Chair.
Okay.
If there's no objection, I'll move to approve the minutes of the trustees of the Governor Stoughton Trust dated August 25th, 2021.
Second.
All in favor, Mr. Doyle?
Yes.
Mr. Zulus?
Yes.
Ms. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
Yes.
And myself, yes. Okay, do we have a motion to adjourn the Governor Stoughton meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, Mr. Doyle?
Yes.
Mr. Zulus?
Yes.
Ms. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
Yes.
And myself, yes. Okay, we're back now in the select board meeting. And I will move that we enter executive session to consider the purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real property, specifically 334 Edge Hill Road, believing that having such discussion in open session would have a detrimental effect on the negotiating position of the board. Not to return to open session. We had approval of meeting minutes for executive session on the agenda. I don't believe we have any this evening. I don't recall seeing any. So I don't think we need the executive session for that. So it's just for strategy with respect to 334 Edge Hill Road.
Second.
Second. All in favor, Mr. Doyle?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
Yes.
Mr. Zulus?
Yes.
Ms. Collins?
Yes.
And myself, yes. So we are now in executive session and we will adjourn from executive session and not return to open session. Thank you to Milton Access Television for your coverage this evening.
Recording stopped.